Hey guys, tonight we step back into the winding stone streets of ancient Rome, a city brimming with grandeur, ambition, and questionable hygiene practices. You stroll past marble columns, under impressive arches, and down pathways bustling with senators, slaves, and soldiers, all united by the universal human need to keep clean. You probably think staying fresh in Rome was simple, maybe even luxurious, considering their famed aqueducts and sophisticated engineering. But tonight, we'll peel back those shiny marble surfaces to see the awkward truths beneath. Trust me, you probably wouldn't survive this without a robust sense of humor. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop a comment below, letting me know your location and the local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you wander deeper into this ancient metropolis, the first place your Roman hosts eagerly guide you is the Thermae, the sprawling public bath complexes that were far more than just places to wash. Picture yourself strolling into one of Rome's famous bathhouses, perhaps the Baths of Caracalla, a monumental structure that would leave any modern spa resort blushing. Huge marble halls, lavish mosaics shimmering under vaulted ceilings, and steam rising gently from warm pools of water at first glance. It feels like you've stepped into a sanctuary of cleanliness and luxury. But don't get too excited yet, because Roman bathing habits might quickly scrub away some of that romantic sheen. Firstly, let's address the elephant in the bathhouse. Romans bathed publicly. Very publicly. Modesty wasn't exactly a high priority here. Romans saw bathing as a community event, a social occasion where politics were discussed, gossip exchanged, and deals brokered, all while sitting stark naked in warm water. That's right. Imagine debating the merits of the latest military campaign while avoiding eye contact with your nude neighbor. Awkward, perhaps, but Romans believed such openness promoted equality and camaraderie, though historians still argue whether this really eased social barriers or simply left everyone equally embarrassed. You might think you'd be handed some plush towels, but Romans rarely had such luxuries. Instead, after your initial rinse, you'd slather your body in scented oils, perhaps olive infused with lavender, jasmine, or rose to loosen the grime and sweat of daily life. Then came the tricky part, scraping yourself clean. Armed with a curious little tool called a strigil, a slightly curved metal blade, you'd scrape off this oily mixture, dirt and all. Sounds refreshing, right? Well, perhaps less so when you realize that scraping off yesterday's grime onto the marble tiles was everyone's responsibility, meaning the floor quickly became a slippery mess of oil, dirt, and regret. Definitely watch your step. Still, despite the somewhat unsanitary floor situation, these bathhouses offered Romans one of the most reliable ways to keep clean. And cleanliness wasn't just about smelling good, it was about health. The Romans recognized a clear connection between hygiene and wellness, believing that regular bathing kept the body balanced and disease at bay. To their credit, they weren't entirely wrong. Bathing in warm water regularly helped prevent infections and provided a sense of general well-being. However, while the rich indulged in oils, perfumes, and private slaves dedicated to the fine art of scraping, your average Roman didn't have it quite so good. If you were among the lower classes, your bathhouse experience was less about leisurely self-care and more about practical necessity. You still got your bath, yes, but you'd likely be crowded into simpler, less extravagant facilities, often so packed you'd barely have room to swing a strigil. And forget about privacy, even by Roman standards. At peak times, these public bathhouses resembled modern-day gym locker rooms at rush hour, but without the handy privacy of clothes. Bathhouses were truly democratic spaces where senators might find themselves rubbing elbows literally with blacksmiths, tradesmen, and merchants. But of course, nothing was ever completely equal. Wealthier Romans typically paid extra for additional luxuries, personal attendants, exclusive oils, and private rooms. Imagine soaking peacefully in your own private pool, sipping wine while your personal slave scrapes away your troubles meanwhile. Everyone else outside fights for space and a working strigil. Some things never change, right? For women, however, Roman baths posed unique challenges. Historians still argue whether Roman women visited mixed-gender bathhouses regularly or relied primarily on separate facilities and private bathing at home. While evidence suggests both practices existed, the very idea of mixed bathing scandalized some Roman moralists. Satirical poets had a field day describing scandalous encounters at the baths, imagining illicit romances unfolding amidst clouds of steam and slippery floors. Whether these tales held truth or were merely scandalous exaggerations to sell poetry scrolls remains debated, but it certainly makes for entertaining historical drama. Speaking of drama, Roman bathhouses weren't just places for hygiene, they were full-on entertainment complexes. After you scraped and rinsed, you might watch wrestlers compete, listen to musicians perform, or stroll through the gymnasium to catch up on the latest training fads. Some bath complexes even featured libraries, lecture halls, and gardens. Imagine grabbing a scroll and lounging in the warm sun, skin freshly scraped and glowing. In many ways, the baths were the social media hubs of ancient Rome, minus the selfies. Unless, of course, you count marble busts as ancient profile pictures. Despite their impressive infrastructure, the bathhouses depended entirely on Rome's sophisticated water delivery systems, primarily the famed aqueducts. These gravity-powered wonders carried water from distant hills and mountains into the bustling heart of the city, enabling the baths to function smoothly. Without aqueducts, Rome's ambitious hygiene system would have quickly dried up, literally and metaphorically. The slightest disruption, whether from drought, maintenance issues, or invasion, could rapidly transform these palatial bathhouses from centers of cleanliness and leisure into rather depressing bone-dry monuments to former glories. This dependence on complex infrastructure reveals a crucial insight. Hygiene in Rome was fragile, vulnerable to political, social, and environmental disruption. Sure, it's all fun and oils until an aqueduct breaks, leaving thousands without bathing water. Suddenly, public health issues become quite serious indeed. Historians still argue whether Rome's impressive sanitation systems contributed significantly to its longevity, or whether their vulnerabilities ultimately became liabilities, hastening Rome's decline. Either way, as you emerge from the baths into the bustling streets, feeling freshly oiled and scraped, you can't help but marvel at how this ancient civilization managed to make something so mundane, cleaning the body, into such an elaborate, socially charged affair. The baths weren't just about cleanliness, they were about identity, community, and a uniquely Roman way of life. Even today, echoes of this ancient obsession with public hygiene persist, reminding us that cleanliness isn't merely next to godliness, it's next to Romanness. As you leave the baths behind and navigate the winding streets, still slightly slippery from leftover oils, your curiosity grows. If Romans relied so heavily on these public bath complexes, what on earth did they do about bathrooms? After all, for all the grandeur of Roman engineering, modern plumbing wasn't exactly a feature in the typical Roman home. The answers, fascinating, amusing, and occasionally a bit uncomfortable, await you further down these ancient streets. As you leave the luxurious but slightly slippery bathhouse floors behind, curiosity tugs at your toga. You can't help but wonder if the Romans had such elaborate ways to stay clean. How exactly did they manage their bathroom needs without the comfort of modern plumbing? Well, my friend, prepare yourself, because ancient Rome's solution to toilet hygiene was, let's say, intriguingly practical, decidedly communal, and more than a little quirky. You stroll deeper into the heart of the bustling Roman metropolis, winding your way through narrow streets filled with the aroma of freshly baked bread, spices, and, well, other less pleasant scents. Ah, yes, the communal bathroom experience, Roman style. It's like the ultimate test of social politeness, only with a lot more, well, bodily functions involved. I can only imagine how strange it must have felt to sit side by side with your neighbor, all while trying to keep up with the latest gossip about Caesar's latest conquest, or wondering if you should chime in about the grain prices. And don't even get me started on how they took care of cleaning up afterward instead of toilet paper. They used a sponge on a stick, kept in a water trough. If you're lucky, you'd get a fresh one. If not, well, it was a bit like a public utensil, I guess. Talk about a different level of shared experience. Do you think modern-day Romans would have been just as chill with the whole no personal space thing? Or do you think we'd be totally shocked? Embarrassing? Perhaps. Efficient? Absolutely. Historians still argue whether the Roman concept of modesty was simply different from ours, or if practicality just outweighed the desire for privacy. After all, in a city with nearly 1 million people, personal space was a luxury very few could afford. Still, you'd have to wonder how comfortable you'd be discussing your personal affairs alongside a complete stranger. Maybe Romans were just better at multitasking. Now, imagine yourself seated there, mid-conversation, when you realize there's no toilet paper in sight because toilet paper won't be invented for another 1,000 years or so. Before you panic, allow me to introduce you to the tersorium, the famous Roman sponge on a stick. Yes, really. Picture a sea sponge affixed firmly to the end of a wooden handle, conveniently kept soaking in a bucket of salt water or vinegar beside the benches. It's communal, reusable, and perhaps slightly horrifying to modern sensibilities, but it did the job remarkably well, considering the alternatives. When finished, you'd rinse the sponge in the bucket, leaving it ready for the next person. Sanitary well. Historians still argue whether the vinegar adequately disinfected the sponges or merely added an intriguing aroma to the experience. But before you cringe too deeply, keep in mind this wasn't a free-for-all. Romans knew about cleanliness, remember those lavish bathhouses, and made efforts to keep these sponges clean. Often attendants refreshed the buckets of vinegar or salt water regularly, trying their best to maintain some basic standards of hygiene. Still, you'd probably avoid thinking too hard about the person who last used your sponge, especially if they'd just enjoyed a hearty Roman meal of beans and cabbage. Let's just say sharing wasn't always caring. Public latrines, as you might suspect, weren't merely practical. Just like the baths, these public toilets served a social function. Romans loved to talk and to network, and apparently, doing business at the latrine was just another form of public discourse. In fact, these places became hotbeds of gossip, political whispers, and casual business negotiations. Imagine closing a deal over your morning routine, shaking hands, and hoping everyone remembered to wash afterward. Well, maybe skip the handshake. Now, while the public latrine may have been the great equalizer, the wealthy Roman household had its own solutions. If you were lucky enough to own a fine villa or even a modest home, you'd probably have your own private facilities. A comfortable seat carved from smooth marble might await you, perhaps located conveniently close to your sleeping quarters. But don't get too jealous, the private option usually involved a small, cramped room with limited ventilation. Romans, for all their sophisticated engineering, hadn't quite mastered bathroom comfort. Private latrines typically opened directly onto cesspits beneath the house, meaning the smell could get noticeable. It's no wonder wealthy Romans often used strong perfumes or burned fragrant herbs to mask the odor. The ancient equivalent of scented candles, perhaps. But let's not overlook the humble chamber pot, a critical part of Roman nighttime routines. Imagine waking up at midnight, groggy from too much wine and olives, and having to stumble your way across cold stone floors to relieve yourself. Enter the simple clay chamber pot, a bedside essential. These pots offered Romans a practical way to handle midnight emergencies without trekking out to public latrines in the dark. The real challenge, though, was dealing with the morning after. Chamber pots had to be emptied regularly, usually into the streets below. You'd best watch your head if you took an early morning stroll beneath a Roman apartment building. A shout of warning like the traditional "guard low" centuries later in medieval France, wasn't always guaranteed. Getting hit by the contents of your neighbor's chamber pot, definitely a rough start to the day. Yet despite these hazards, Romans did possess remarkable sanitation infrastructure. Beneath your feet runs the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer system, an impressive feat of ancient engineering built centuries earlier to drain marshland and manage city waste. Designed initially as an open-air canal in the early Republic, it gradually evolved into a sophisticated subterranean tunnel network. Without these sewers, Roman streets might have resembled swampy, muddy rivers rather than the bustling thoroughfares you see today. The Cloaca Maxima efficiently carried away waste and rainwater, preventing outbreaks of disease and maintaining Rome's reputation as a relatively clean city by ancient standards, at least. However, the Cloaca Maxima had its limits. Like any infrastructure, it occasionally failed spectacularly. Historical accounts recall moments when floods overwhelmed the system, causing sewage to spill dramatically back into the streets. Imagine standing near the Forum, discussing philosophy or politics, only to find yourself ankle-deep in an unpleasant flood from beneath the city streets. Not exactly Rome's proudest moment. These public sanitation facilities and elaborate sewer systems were far from perfect, but they represented remarkable advancements in urban cleanliness. They allowed Rome to grow into a bustling metropolis without descending into constant health crises. The Romans understood, perhaps better than any other ancient civilization, the critical importance of public hygiene. Historians still argue whether these sanitation measures were more about practicality or civic pride, but the end result was clearer, cleaner, healthier urban environment compared to their ancient contemporaries. Yet for all their impressive public works, Roman sanitation was deeply dependent on slave labor. The attendants who refreshed the vinegar buckets, cleaned latrines, and emptied chamber pots performed tasks most Romans found beneath their dignity. This harsh reality serves as a reminder that Rome's impressive cleanliness and comfort rested upon the shoulders of an invisible workforce. Their labor ensuring others could enjoy relative hygiene in a crowded city. As you walk these streets, soaking in this odd mixture of ancient luxury and discomfort, you begin to grasp the complexities of Roman sanitation. On one hand, sophisticated engineering and communal facilities made urban living possible. On the other, the reality of communal toilets, sponge sharing, and chamber pots reminds you that ancient life, even in mighty Rome, involved its share of awkwardness and inconvenience. So, next time you complain about a clogged toilet or running out of toilet paper, spare a thought for the Romans and be grateful you don't have to borrow your neighbor's tersorium. But the Roman story of cleanliness doesn't end here. Just beyond these public latrines and chamber pots lies another fascinating aspect of Roman hygiene, where liquid waste becomes liquid gold and cleanliness becomes surprisingly profitable. Curious. Keep walking with me, you won't believe where we're headed next, and you leave the stone benches of the public latrine behind. Your sandals a bit dusty, but your curiosity only sharpened. Ancient Rome has already proven that when it came to personal hygiene, creativity and practicality often held hands, sometimes while holding a sponge on a stick. But now, you're heading into one of the most surprising corners of Roman cleanliness culture, where waste wasn't just something to dispose of, it was something to profit from. Yes, tonight you're going to explore the odd but undeniably lucrative world of Roman urine collection. You walk past a row of Insulae Rome's classic multi-story apartment buildings, where the alleyways are just wide enough for a narrow cart or a particularly brave cat. Nestled in between these brick structures are clay pots tucked into the corners like strange offerings. You might think someone forgot to put out the recycling. But no, these are full, and not with olives. You've found yourself at the edge of a Roman Phalonica, a laundry facility, and the smell hits you before the explanation does. Urine, believe it or not, was a critical cleaning agent in the ancient Roman world. It was collected from public urinals and chamber pots, often voluntarily donated by the citizens of Rome and sold to professional fullers. the people responsible for cleaning and whitening garments. Why? Because urine contains ammonia, and ammonia is surprisingly good at breaking down grease and lifting stains. The result? Fabrics that were cleaner, whiter, and, at least chemically speaking, fresher if not exactly lavender-scented. You watch as tunics are soaked in large vats, the contents of which are swirled and stomped on by barefoot workers. Yes, barefoot. These fullers, often enslaved or extremely poor freemen, trample the clothes with their own feet, churning the urine-soaked garments like grapes in a wine press. It's not glamorous, but it works. At least, eventually. It's one of those professions where you really hope the lunch break includes sandals and a breeze. Historians still argue whether these fuller Nike were regulated for hygiene or whether the olfactory consequences were just accepted as part of city life. It seems there was little regulation beyond the occasional complaint from wealthier neighbors who weren't thrilled to be living next to Rome's most aromatic industry. But like much in Roman society, function trumped fragrance. This might sound like one of those fringe Roman practices that no one talked about except everyone did. Even the emperors got involved. In fact, the Emperor Vespasian, reigning from 69 to 79 CE, famously instituted a urine tax vectigal urinae on the buyers of collected waste. That's right, he monetized pee. It was a smart fiscal move, though perhaps not the most glamorous legacy. Still, when criticized for taxing such a base product, Vespasian reportedly held a coin to his nose and declared, "Pecunia non olet, money does not stink," a phrase still used today. Funny how a line about urine can live on longer than most Roman temples. In case you're wondering, this wasn't some back alley side hustle. Urine collection was a legitimate and organized part of Rome's sanitation and business infrastructure. Public urinals, often little more than strategically placed jars or small troughs at street corners, were maintained for the express purpose of contributing to this unusual but vital part of the city economy. It's like if recycling bins today were filled with, well, never mind. But full-on IK weren't just in the city. Even places like Pompeii had them, complete with large basins, drying racks, and even ventilation holes in the ceilings, which, let's be honest, were less about fresh air and more about not passing out from fumes. Many of these structures remain preserved, and if you ever visit the ruins of Pompeii, you can still see the layout of these surprisingly efficient cleaning factories. You can almost hear the squelch of fabric underfoot if you listen closely enough, and perhaps smell it too, if you're not careful. What's remarkable is how accepted and even respected this process was. Fullers performed a dirty but essential job, in a society where appearance mattered enormously. A freshly cleaned white toga could mean the difference between being seen as respectable or disheveled. So, yes, your prestige depended in part on people stomping your garments in communal pee. It's humbling, really. Of course, the elite had their own laundering done at home, typically by slaves trained in the finer arts of textile care. These home laundries might not have used the same industrial vats, but they still relied on ammonia and hard labor. Even the wealthiest patrician, draped in gleaming linen, owed a debt to the city's less glamorous chemistry. But let's step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture. The use of urine in cleaning wasn't just a quirky Roman trait. It reflected a broader attitude toward waste in the ancient world. To the Romans, nothing was truly useless. Every material, every byproduct, every bit of daily life was part of a larger system. What was waste to one person became opportunity for another. And in a city as massive and complex as Rome, that mindset helped the machine keep turning. This resourcefulness wasn't limited to fullers. Tanners also used urine in leather processing. The ammonia helped soften animal hides, making them easier to shape and prepare for use in sandals, belts, and armor. So, the next time you imagine a dashing centurion in full battle gear, remember parts of his outfit were pre-treated with urine, donations. Even Roman barbers may have used small amounts of urine in teeth-whitening pastes, though historians still debate whether this was a widespread practice or an early version of influencer beauty hacks. Either way, it proves the point the Romans had a use for everything. Still, there's no getting around the fact that this approach to cleanliness walks a very fine line between brilliance and ew. It forces you to question what you think you know about hygiene. Is cleanliness about sweet-smelling soap and private bathrooms, or is it about practical results and community cooperation? No matter how pungent. You might be shaking your head now, but remember when it came to public health, the Romans were centuries ahead of most other civilizations. Their system of latrines, waste collection, water delivery, and yes, even laundry created one of the most hygienic environments in the ancient world. It may not meet modern standards of fresh, but it certainly beat the alternatives. And what about those massive garments? Especially the pristine white togas worn by senators and officials. Those things were notoriously hard to clean, and even harder to wear without looking like a wrapped burrito. Keeping them dazzling white was a full-time job, literally. The process involved multiple soaks, scrubs, and drying cycles. Some laundries even had patented whitening formulas, using a mix of chalk, clay, and, yes, you guessed it, urine. You begin to understand why laundry was its own profession in Rome. Anyone who could keep a senator's toga white deserved a medal, or at least a long soak in the baths afterward. Historians still debate whether the Romans saw their fullers with respect or simply tolerated them as necessary. Archaeological evidence points both ways. On the one hand, fullers had their own guilds and religious dedications. On the other hand, their workshops were often tucked away in less desirable neighborhoods. Either way, they were indispensable and quite literally the backbone of Roman public image. As the sun sets over the city and you catch one last whiff from a nearby laundry vat, you realize that cleanliness in ancient Rome wasn't about perfection. It was about effort, innovation, and sheer sponge-wielding willpower. From public latrines to laundry soaked in ammonia, the Romans redefined what it meant to be clean in a world without running water or soap. It wasn't always glamorous. It certainly wasn't always fragrant, but it worked. And now, as you continue your walk past the laundry streets, you wonder what other strange tools and techniques did Romans use to stay fresh, survive the summers, and impress the Senate. You haven't even scratched the surface of their grooming routines, their creative deodorants, or their love-hate relationship with body odor. So don't wander too far, we've still got a lot of ancient funk to uncover. You continue your walk through the ancient Roman streets, your nose just beginning to forgive the Phalonica experience. And now that you've seen how Rome cleaned its clothes, your mind drifts toward a more personal curiosity. How did people stay fresh? We've talked about the baths, yes, and you've marveled at the sponge sticks. But surely there was more to personal hygiene than scraping and soaking. After all, Rome gets hot, really hot. And when you're wrapped in layers of linen or wool, let's just say things can get ripe. Welcome to the unexpectedly delightful world of Roman body odor management, where perfumes, powders, and some creative trial and error held the line between fragrant and foul. You wander into a Roman market square just as the day begins to warm. Merchants cry out their wares: fresh bread, spices, olives, and tucked between stalls of grapes and garum, you spot a booth with little flasks lined in neat rows. That's such an interesting peek into Roman culture. It's fascinating how their relationship with scent was more practical and functional than we might think today. The fact that perfume oils were essential for hygiene, not just luxury, says a lot about how pervasive bodily odors were in the ancient world. They didn't have the modern conveniences we take for granted, like deodorants and regular soap. So these oils must have been a game changer. I love the comparison to modern pocket cologne or body spray. It's kind of hilarious how the same concept has survived for thousands of years. I can just picture a Roman senator striding through the streets of Rome with his little vial of rose oil, carefully applying it so as not to offend anyone, while keeping up appearances of power and dignity. Also, the idea that overdoing it could make you a subject of mockery is totally relatable. People today still joke about someone wearing too much cologne, just like back then. It shows how even in ancient Rome, subtlety and restraint in fragrance were valued kind of a funny little mirror to modern-day perfume etiquette. Do you think scent still plays a similar role in society today? Or has it evolved into something more symbolic or personal? Historians still argue whether these jokes were grounded in truth or exaggerated social commentary. But either way, the nose knew. Of course, perfume wasn't the only tool in the Roman freshness arsenal. Enter calcium carbonate, or as your friendly neighborhood apothecary calls it, chalk powder. This fine white dust was used to soak up sweat in all the places. Linen tunics didn't breathe well, which is most of them, especially under the arms, behind the knees, or anywhere a toga might trap the day's heat and frustration. You could rub it directly on the skin or shake it over your undergarments, hoping to stay a little drier during Senate debates or long temple ceremonies. You also hear whispers about more experimental deodorants, mixtures of alum, vinegar, and even powdered horn or crushed minerals. These blends were applied to the underarms to stop sweat and kill odor-causing bacteria. Essentially, the Roman version of antiperspirant minus the aluminum salts, unless you were very, very lucky. Whether or not these worked is still debated by scholars, but what's clear is that the Romans definitely tried. For women, beauty and hygiene often overlapped. You pass a group of Roman ladies at a cosmetics stall, inspecting small mirrors and packets of face powder. These powders weren't just for complexion, they were also fragrant, doubling as personal deodorant. Some women even applied rose water or citrus oil behind their ears and knees, scenting the skin in places least likely to be covered. A sort of early pulse point technique, if you will. Interestingly, a Roman woman's freshness or lack thereof could influence her social reputation. In literature, a woman who smelled like the baths was seen as refined and desirable. One who smelled of sweat and garlic, less so. These associations often had less to do with hygiene itself and more to do with class and access. Fragrance was privilege. If you could afford oils and scented baths, you probably weren't hauling amphorae or scrubbing laundry in a full arnica. And then, there was garum, the famous fish sauce that flavored nearly every Roman dish. Also had a curious secondary effect. It seeped into pores. That's right. Eat too much garum, and you might carry its aroma with you, whether you liked it or not. It was a scent both beloved and reviled. Imagine cologne with a hint of anchovy. Some Romans embraced it as a signature of their cuisine, while others complained that it lingered on breath and skin in the most unwelcome ways. A fishy, cologne-bold choice. Of course, you can't talk about staying clean in Rome without mentioning rituals. In many Roman religious practices, cleanliness wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Washing before prayer, applying sacred oils, and purifying the body were all part of everyday devotion. Even the idea of clean had layers: dirtiness of the body, dirtiness of the spirit, dirtiness of the intention. So when a Roman covered their scent with floral oil, it wasn't always vanity. Sometimes it was a way of showing piety, respect, or readiness for communion with the divine. Yet for all this ritual and effort, most Romans still battled body odor daily. With hot summers, dense crowds, and synthetic fabrics still centuries away, the average person did their best with what they had. You suddenly realize that their standards weren't so different from yours. Everyone just wants to smell good enough not to be noticed. Or better yet, noticed in a good way. Interestingly, the wealthier Romans often outsourced freshness. Slaves were assigned not just to carry perfumes and prepare oils, but to sniff their masters for any offensive odors. Imagine your job being a human scent checker. If you detected a problem, it was your duty to apply corrective measures: more powder, a fresh tunic, maybe a citrus rinse. Not glamorous, but very Roman. And what about hair? Roman men and women both believed in regular grooming, not just for beauty, but to stay clean. You pass a tonsure, or barber, as he deftly scrapes a customer's face clean with a curved razor and finishes with scented oil. Hair, especially in summer, could trap sweat and odor, so it was trimmed often. Beards were oiled, curled, or removed entirely depending on the trend. Even armpits and legs weren't off limits. Romans may not have invented the razor, but they definitely embraced the idea of smooth equals clean. Body hair, like body odor, was a thing to be managed. Historians still argue whether these grooming habits were driven more by genuine hygiene concerns or sheer social performance. But standing here, amid jars of oil, jars of powder, and the subtle wafts of lavender mingling with garlic and sweat, you understand something important. Staying clean in Rome wasn't a single act. It was a lifestyle, a daily ritual, a performance art of sorts, one where scent, texture, and presentation all blended into a fragrant ballet of survival. As you leave the square, you catch a final whiff of rosewater from a passing noblewoman and glance back at the jars still lined up under the shade. You realize the Romans didn't have hygiene in the modern medical sense, but they did have pride, aesthetics, and an uncanny ability to turn even odor into an opportunity for social status. And honestly, that's pretty impressive. But now that we've scrubbed and powdered and perfumed ourselves into acceptable public form, it's time to look down, literally. Because beneath those carefully scented citizens lies a world of water channels, aqueducts, and stone-paved marvels that made all of this possible. Coming up next, how Rome got its water flowing, and why the answer involves gravity, genius, and just a dash of drama. You've wandered the bustling streets, survived a sponge-on-a-stick encounter, and narrowly avoided being doused from a chamber pot. But now, as the sun climbs higher and the city pulses with mid-morning life, your eyes drift upward to the graceful stone arches stretching across hillsides and valleys. Rome's lifeblood, quite literally, flowed along these monumental structures. Welcome to the world of Roman aqueducts, gravity-fed miracles that made all that scrubbing, soaking, and shimmering skin possible. You follow a gentle slope out of the city toward one of the major aqueduct routes, maybe the Aqua Claudia or Aqua Marcia, depending on how far you've walked. The countryside opens wide, the air cleaner than in the city, and ahead looms an elegant stone bridge lined with channels. You wouldn't immediately guess it's a water pipeline. No thundering machinery, no pumps, just arches and shadows, stretching into the distance like the spine of some great sleeping beast. What makes Roman aqueducts so impressive is how understated they are. You might not even notice them unless you're looking. Yet they carried millions of gallons of fresh water into the city every day. No electric motors, no fuel, just a precise understanding of slope and flow. The entire system relied on gravity, gently coaxing water downhill over dozens, even hundreds of miles. Let that sink in. The aqueducts, some of them built centuries before your visit, delivered water from distant springs and mountain lakes into the very heart of a city packed with 1 million people. That water fed the baths you just visited, the latrines, the fulanaceae, the fountains inside bathhouses, the elite villas with their marble cisterns, and the city's endless parade of thirsty citizens. Historians still argue whether this was Rome's greatest feat, not conquest, not literature, but plumbing. Along the way, water was carefully managed. It entered through settling tanks where sediment could drop out, passed through covered stone or terracotta pipes, and was divided at castella, or water distribution towers, to serve different districts. Every drop was tracked and directed like a legion on campaign. And believe me, water in Rome was a military operation. Leaks were reported, theft was punished, and engineers were respected like generals. As you stroll beneath one of the arches, you notice an odd sight, a stone access panel, slightly ajar. Curious, you peek inside and see the narrow channel where water once rushed. It's surprisingly clean, considering the centuries, and lined with a light coating of calcium scale, the inevitable legacy of hard water. Roman engineers planned for this. building in places where scale could be scraped regularly. Cleaning aqueducts was a full-time job, performed by workers with torches and chisels who crawled through narrow tunnels like water ninjas. Some aqueducts even included inverted siphons, engineering marvels, that allowed water to dip into valleys and rise again on the other side using pressure alone. Imagine that centuries before the Industrial Revolution, Rome was using hydraulic principles that would make your high school science teacher beam with pride. But here's the real kicker: water wasn't just a utility in Rome, it was a status symbol. Imagine owning a villa on the Esquiline Hill, with a private pipe running from a nearby aqueduct. You'd have fountains trickling in your garden, maybe even a decorative pool. You might host banquets where guests washed their hands in scented water before reclining on couches to eat. And while you wouldn't want to brag, you'd definitely make sure your neighbors saw the pipe, because not everyone was allowed one. That's right, individual connections to aqueducts were controlled, often requiring approval from a magistrate. Unauthorized taps, illegal. Water theft, a real crime, punishable by fine, exile, or worse, depending on how much you borrowed. So naturally, there were water cops inspectors who patrolled the aqueducts, looking for leaks, illegal taps, or sabotage. It's like utility maintenance, Roman edition. They were called curatores aquarum, and they had the authority to shut down whole sections if needed. You did not want to cross them. Still, not all water was created equal. Romans believed in a pecking order of purity, with mountain spring water topping the list, followed by rivers, then wells, and finally, cistern water, which could taste like roof tile and disappointment. If you were wealthy, your estate might have access to the highest grade spring water. If you were poor, you might be stuck hauling buckets from a public fountain, hoping to beat the mid-morning rush. And yes, there were public fountains, hundreds of them. You pass one now, a bubbling stone basin where women are filling clay jugs and chatting about the day's market prices. Kids splash their hands in the cool stream. A dog laps at the overflow. These fountains, supplied by the aqueducts, were the lifeline for most Roman citizens. If the water stopped flowing, panic. If it came out cloudy, more panic. Reliable water was a matter of survival and pride. You hear a familiar clink. Someone just dropped a coin into the fountain, making a wish. Superstition, sure, but also habit. Romans believed in water spirits, nymphs, and the gods of springs and rivers. Many aqueduct routes were dedicated to deities, gifts to the gods, as much as gifts to the people. It's all connected religion, cleanliness, engineering. Just like the water system itself, it all flows together. One strange tidbit catches your ear from a nearby merchant. Some Romans believed that water could carry moods. That cheerful water, fast-moving, clear, babbling could bring good fortune, while stagnant water might invite illness or melancholy. So yes, even the vibe of your water mattered. You begin to appreciate why fountains were so lively, often adorned with carvings, playful figures, or even scenes of mythology. They weren't just plumbing, they were spiritual refreshers. But of course, it wasn't all perfect. Aqueducts broke, earthquakes cracked channels. Saboteurs, often during civil unrest or invasions, poisoned or blocked supply lines. And when the water stopped flowing, everything shut down. No baths, no cleaning, no fountains, no fishy fashion shows at the Fullonica. The city ground to a halt, and public health suffered. Historians still argue whether the eventual collapse of Rome's water infrastructure contributed to the empire's fall. It's dramatic, yes, but not entirely wrong. After all, a city of 1 million people cannot run on puddles. As you wander back into the city, watching water cascade from a lion's mouth into a waiting basin, you realize how vital this hidden system really was. The glory of Rome wasn't just in its temples or forums, it was in its flow, in the gravity-fed veins that turned dust into civilization, in the aqueducts that made washing, bathing, drinking, cooking, and even sponge stick etiquette possible. And it's not over yet. The waters made it to the city, Yes, but what happens when it leaves? Where did all that wastewater go? How did the Romans manage filth in a world without flush toilets? You're about to follow the flow one step further into the underground arteries where Rome's true cleansing secrets are buried. You descend into the underbelly of the eternal city, now not metaphorically, but quite literally, with the aqueducts delivering fresh, clean water from the countryside and fountains gurgling with civic pride. Your thoughts drift to a less glamorous but essential question once all that water was used for bathing, scrubbing, washing, cooking, drinking, and yes, toileting. Where did it go? Welcome to Rome's ancient sewer system. Welcome to the Cloaca Maxima. The name might make you smirk, it does sound like a villainous spell from a Latin-themed wizard school. But this engineering marvel was no joke. Cloaca Maxima means greatest sewer, and it lived up to its title. Built originally around the 6th century BCE, during the reign of Rome's early kings, this stone and brick tunnel was designed to drain swampy lands and prevent flooding in the Forum. But over time, it became the backbone of Rome's waste management network, collecting runoff, stormwater, bathwater, and yes, plenty of human output from latrines and chamber pots. You walk along one of the paved streets, and beneath your feet, you know it's still there. In fact, parts of the Cloaca Maxima still carry water today, over 2 millennia later. It's not glamorous. It's not something Romans boasted about on marble inscriptions. But without it, the grandeur above would have sunk into a swampy, unsanitary mess. Following the scent of wet stone and something vaguely metallic, you reach a gated arch near the Tiber River. Behind it lies the dark curve of the ancient tunnel, wide enough to walk in if you dare, though not without ducking. You feel a rush of cool, damp air, and imagine a Roman maintenance worker down there, torch in hand, wading through ankle-deep sludge to clear blockages. Not exactly the heroic imagery of gladiators and senators, but arguably more important to day-to-day survival. The Romans, for all their rituals and perfumes, had a strikingly pragmatic approach to waste. Their sewer system was built on logic: water in, waste out. Many public latrines were constructed directly above sewer lines, so everything solid and liquid washed down with a continuous stream of fresh aqueduct water. Think of it as a gravity-fed flush system, centuries ahead of modern plumbing. Still, not all toilets connected directly to the sewers. Chamber pots were emptied manually, often flung into the streets in poorer areas or dumped into cesspits in wealthier homes. That's right, despite all their sophistication. Rome still had its moments of, let's say, airborne surprises. Pedestrians learned quickly to hug the building walls or walk with a sharp ear for upstairs windows creaking open. You never knew what might fall. Some even carried small umbrellas at night, not for rain, but for protection against more domestic precipitation. Historians still argue whether the Cloaca Maxima was truly effective at managing disease, or if it merely displaced the filth. One thing is certain, it helped keep street levels dry and passable, which was critical in a city that relied on foot traffic, carts, and ceremonial parades. Rome had its floods. Yes, but imagine it without this system. The Forum would have become a pond every winter. As you keep walking, you pass by a public fountain where a woman is rinsing vegetables. Just a few streets over, another resident is tossing the contents of a bucket into the gutter. It's a strange dichotomy, clean water and wastewater always dancing together, often only separated by timing and gravity. And speaking of gutters, Rome's streets were designed to accommodate runoff. Slightly convex in shape, they allowed water and waste to flow into central channels. These channels often connected to the greater sewer system. Imagine entire neighborhoods timed to flush with rain or scheduled water releases. There was a rhythm to it, a daily cleansing that required no pipes under every building, just gravity, careful planning, and a lot of elbow grease. But even the best systems break down. The Cloaca Maxima, like any infrastructure, required maintenance. Teams of workers were dispatched to inspect tunnels, remove debris, and sometimes even wade through knee-high muck to pull out dead animals or jammed debris. We don't often imagine the Roman Empire needing plumbers, but here they were unsung heroes, torch-bearing and sandals deep in what everyone else tried to forget. And then there's the wildlife. You'd like to think it's all just water and stone down there, but no. Rats, snakes, and even stray dogs sometimes made the tunnels home. One ancient story tells of a child being swept away into the sewer during a flood, only to be rescued blocks away, shaken but alive. That may be legend, or maybe just Roman parenting at its grittiest. Not all waste went to the sewers, though. In many neighborhoods, especially the crowded ones, night soil collectors roamed at dawn. These men gathered the contents of chamber pots, cisterns, and cesspits, hauling it away in carts for disposal or reused sometimes as fertilizer on nearby farms. It was a dirty job, but it kept the streets cleaner than you might expect. And it speaks volumes about the Roman mindset. Everything has a system, even waste. The elite, of course, were somewhat insulated. A noblewoman's villa might have a latrine that opened into a covered channel leading discreetly into a sewer line. Out of sight, out of mind. Slaves handled the rest, scrubbing stone seats, emptying pots, and burning aromatic herbs to keep things pleasant. It's hard to imagine Caesar ever lifting a chamber pot, isn't it? Yet for all its functionality, the Cloaca Maxima also had symbolic weight. The sewer was seen as a kind of cleansing womb, a place where impurities left the city and were reborn into something new, fertile, flowing, natural. Religious rituals were even held along its banks, and in rare moments, the tunnels themselves were used for secret travel, storage, and even hiding during political unrest. You wouldn't want to be down there long, but in a pinch, it served. And remember the Tiber. All of this, every drop, every clump, every surprise donation ended up there. The river was both a sewer outlet and a sacred lifeline, used for commerce, rituals, and even swimming. Rome's relationship with the Tiber was complicated, messy, and utterly dependent. People fished in it, children played by it, bodies were sometimes dumped into it, water flowed out and waste flowed in. It's the most Roman relationship you can imagine, beautiful, practical, and full of contradictions. So now you stand by the riverbank, watching sunlight shimmer on the water. Somewhere upstream, aqueducts carry clarity into the city. Down here, the Cloaca Maxima returns the favor, quietly exhaling centuries of urban life back into nature. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. Rome didn't hide its mess, it engineered around it. And just as you're reflecting on the marvels of waste management, your nose catches a whiff of something far more inviting: bread. Roasted meat, fresh herbs. The midday meal is being prepared, and Romans took their food hygiene as seriously as their plumbing. Up next, how kitchens kept food safe, how restaurants worked without sinks, and why Roman food safety depended on smoke, salt, and suspiciously brave mice. You turn from the slow-moving waters of the Tiber, nose lifted like a bloodhound following the scent of roast lamb and toasted barley. Rome's sewers may have carried away the waste, but what came before it was arguably more important: food. And here, in the labyrinthine kitchens and smoky taverns of the city, cleanliness didn't just mean comfort, it meant survival. You pass through a busy market square, your feet dodging between baskets of dates, heaps of grain, hanging fish, and the occasional tortoise eyeing you suspiciously. Roman food culture was vibrant and complex, but when you peek into a food stall, you realize something startling. There's no sink, no faucet, no hand soap, yet someone's carving dried sausages and ladling lentil stew like it's the cleanest thing in the world. So how did the ancient Romans keep their food safe without modern sanitation? The answer, as you'll soon discover, is a blend of ingenuity, ritual, social norms, and sheer survival instinct. Let's start in a Roman kitchen, Cleanliness, if you're fancy. The average Roman home, particularly in the crowded insulae, didn't have one. Instead, many relied on street vendors or communal cookhouses called popinae. But for those who did have a kitchen, it usually meant a small, smoky room with a brick hearth, a few earthenware pots, and a lot of charcoal dust. Fire was the centerpiece wood, or charcoal burned constantly, not just for cooking but for sterilizing. Heat, in many ways, was the Roman dishwasher. Water, hauled in amphorae from fountains or storage cisterns, was poured carefully to rinse vegetables, hands, and utensils. No soap, just the mechanical power of moving water and friction. For especially greasy pans, they might rub sand or ash inside and scour it clean. It's not glamorous, but sand and ash are surprisingly effective scrubbers. Remember that next time you run out of dish detergent. But perhaps Rome's most reliable food safety technique was preservation. Salted fish, dried fruit, smoked meat, pickled vegetables. These were the cornerstones of a Roman pantry. The less moisture in your food, the less likely it was to go bad. Romans salted the life out of everything. They also relied heavily on fermentation wine, vinegar, cheese, and of course, garum. That infamous fermented fish sauce may smell like Neptune's forgotten laundry, but it was acidic and antibacterial, making it not only flavorful, but functional. Historians still argue whether garum was safer than fresh meat in many cases, and it might have been, because meat was tricky. Without refrigeration, you either ate it quickly, salted it within an inch of its life, or hoped for the best. That's where herbs came in. Romans used garlic, rosemary, mint, and cumin, not just for taste, but because they helped slow spoilage and masked off smells. If your stew smells like cumin, maybe no one notices the slightly grey pork. In wealthier homes, food hygiene became a bit more sophisticated. Servants were tasked with washing hands before cooking. Herbs were rinsed, bowls wiped with vinegar, and dishes stacked in orderly rows. Some estates even had designated cleaning slaves, people who did nothing but scrub pots, polish bronze, and keep the pantry pest-free. Mice were a constant threat. In fact, in Pompeii, archaeologists found tiny clay vessels that held dried mint to repel rodents, kind of like an ancient herbal mousetrap, one with surprisingly good taste. Still, not everyone had the luxury of a private kitchen. Rome's poor and working classes often ate out at thermopolia, ancient fast food counters where hot and cold dishes were served from deep jars sunk into marble counters. These shops were everywhere like a street taco stand, met a buffet line. Food was hot, which helped kill germs, and turnover was high. That meant less time for bacteria to throw a party in your chickpea stew. You pause at one such counter, running your hand along the smooth marble and peering into a deep terracotta jar. It's empty now, but you can imagine the rich scent of lentils bubbling with leeks and garum. The shopkeeper would have served it in a clay bowl, reused until it cracked, cleaned between servings, probably with water and a quick rub of cloth. Not perfect, but better than nothing. And cleanliness wasn't just about the food, it was about the eater, too. Romans washed their hands before meals not always with soap, but with water, oil, or sometimes wine. Guests at formal dinners were offered bowls of perfumed water to rinse their fingers before reclining. And after the meal, more rinsing. Fingers were the primary utensil, so keeping them reasonably clean was part of the etiquette. One strange tidbit you overhear from a passing merchant: some elite Romans kept tiny pet monkeys in the kitchen, not for amusement, but as a kind of food safety alarm. Monkeys were said to avoid food that had spoiled or been tampered with. If the monkey wouldn't touch it, neither should you. Is it true historians still debate whether this was practical reality or high-class superstition? But either way, it's a wildly Roman solution. And when things did go wrong, when someone fell ill after a meal, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a matter of cosmic balance. Food poisoning could be interpreted as a sign of divine displeasure. Rituals might be performed, prayers whispered to household gods, especially Vesta, goddess of the hearth, you begin to see how sanitation, superstition, and spirituality swirled together in the Roman worldview like steam from a simmering pot. And yet, for all the risks, Rome wasn't overrun with constant plagues from bad cooking. Why? Because people were careful. They didn't fully understand microbes, but they understood consequences. You didn't eat food that smelled funny. You didn't serve shellfish during the wrong season. And if your neighbor got sick, you probably fed the dog your leftovers that night, just to be sure. Wealthier Romans, meanwhile, took their culinary safety to absurd lengths. Some employed pregustatores, or food tasters, people whose job it was to take the first bite in case of poison. Not exactly about hygiene, but definitely about survival. If your taster didn't fall over clutching his stomach, dinner was served. And while most tasters were concerned with political intrigue more than salmonella, it was still a strange form of quality control. But perhaps the most underrated part of Roman food safety, their love of simplicity. While extravagant banquets made headlines or scroll headlines, the day-to-day Roman diet was built on basics: bread, porridge, legumes, cheese, and fruit. These foods were less likely to spoil and didn't require much fuss. Simpler food, fewer hazards. Sometimes the humble barley mash was healthier than the honey-glazed dormouse. You step away from the thermopolium now, stomach rumbling and nostrils full of kitchen smoke. Around you, Rome continues its culinary ballet. Pots clatter, flames flicker, and somewhere, someone is grinding coriander while fending off a cat. It's chaotic, yes, but it works. Rome fed 1 million people daily with no refrigeration, no running water, and no food-grade plastic. And it did it using heat, salt, ritual, and an astonishing amount of gut instinct. You suddenly feel a new respect for the cooks, cleaners, and cautious snackers of the ancient world. Because staying alive wasn't just about avoiding sword fights, it was about not eating spoiled figs on a Tuesday. And speaking of Tuesday, it's bath day. Again, you're beginning to see why. Next up, follow a Roman citizen as they prepare for the social event of the week, the visit to the baths. From sweaty beginnings to a strigal scrape. Let's slide back into the steamy world of communal cleansing, where nudity is mandatory and modesty is left at the door. By now, you've wandered markets, dodged airborne chamber pots, admired aqueducts, and even learned how to sniff test questionable stew. But there's one place that ties all those pieces of Roman hygiene together in a way that's oddly theatrical: the public bathhouse. So here you are again, standing outside one of Rome's grand thermae. You can smell the steam before you see it, an earthy mix of heated water, perfumed oil, and yes, a trace of humanity. This is the place where Romans came to wash, gossip, debate, flirt, and nap. It's a spa, a social club, and a pressure cooker for Roman culture, all rolled into one steamy marble box. You step through the arch and into the vestibule. Instantly, your skin drinks in the damp warmth. The air hugs your body, fogging the edges of your vision. Patrons mill about in various states of undress, towels over shoulders or tied around waists, sandals slapping against wet tiles. Nobody is in a rush. Time here flows like the warm water in the caldarium, slow and heavy. Now, bathhouses in Rome weren't optional. They were a daily or near-daily ritual for many. Imagine if your gym, your favorite coffee shop, your friend's couch, and a hot tub all merged into one experience. That's the Roman bathhouse, rich or poor, man or woman on alternating hours or in separate wings. Young or old, everyone came here. Historians still argue whether baths were primarily hygienic or social, but from what you're seeing, it's probably both. First, you enter the appoditerium, or changing room. There's no privacy, just rows of cubbyholes and the occasional slave helping a master out of a tunic. Theft was surprisingly common in bathhouses. So many patrons brought a servant to watch over their belongings. If not, you had to risk your favorite toga disappearing while you were mid-soak. It's the Roman equivalent of leaving your iPhone in a locker without a lock and hoping for the best. Stripped down now, you move into the tepidarium, the warm room. Not hot yet, just toasty. It's designed to ease your body into the experience, like a prelude to a concerto. The mosaic floor is smooth underfoot, and you find yourself staring at it just to avoid locking eyes with that one guy stretching way too dramatically by the fountain. There's a faint hum of conversation, soft enough to lull you, but lively enough to feel alive. Then comes the caldarium, the hot room. This is where things get serious. You walk through a stone arch into a space swirling with steam, where the walls drip and the air feels like it's giving your pores a motivational speech. In the center is a hot plunge pool, the water cloudy with oils and minerals. Men recline around it, pouring water over their heads or floating lazily like rotisserie chickens in a marinade. Here's where the strigil comes out. That humble metal curve is the MVP of Roman bathing. After sweating out your impurities in the heat, you smear olive oil all over your skin, then scrape it off along with dirt, dead cells, and probably a few regrets with the strigil. You watch a man do it slowly, methodically, like he's peeling away the day. A slave stands nearby, ready to collect the gooey mix of oil and grime in a shallow bowl. Yes, someone's job is to collect that. Occasionally it was even resold for what? You don't want to know. Let's just say exfoliation was a group project. One fringe tidbit whispers through the steam. Some Romans believed that the mixture scraped off during this ritual contained healing properties, especially if it came from an athlete or gladiator. Apparently, sweat-soaked oil made great salve for sore joints or mysterious ailments. Historians still argue whether this was genuine belief or just another marketing gimmick. You hear a man mutter as he pats his face with a lavender cloth. After the heat and scraping, you shuffle back into the frigidarium, the cold room. The chill hits you like a slap from a disapproving senator. A marble pool gleams in the middle, and brave bathers dunk themselves under, gasping and laughing. You dip a toe, then another. Eventually, you slide in with all the grace of a startled eel. It's shocking but cleansing. Your skin tightens. Your mind sharpens. It's the Roman reboot button. But the experience doesn't end there. Many bathhouses offer more than just water. There are barbers offering trims and shaves, masseurs kneading shoulders with perfumed oil, philosophers debating under frescoed ceilings, merchants cutting deals in the warm corners. It's a multi-sensory affair, and no one seems eager to leave. Food is sometimes available, too. Snacks like nuts, fruit, or pastries passed around, or bought at nearby stalls. You can almost imagine a man munching on a fig while getting his heels scraped. Don't knock it till you've tried it. As you recline on a stone bench, letting your fingers trace the condensation gathering on the wall, you notice something else: the sound, or rather, the layers of sound. Water lapping, low voices, footsteps on wet tile, the occasional splash or clink of a cup. It's an orchestra of relaxation, conducted by heat and routine. You close your eyes and think about what this ritual means, not just in terms of hygiene, but identity. A clean body in Rome isn't just about health. It's about belonging. To skip the baths is to skip participation in civic life. The emperor bathes. Senators bathe. Slaves, soldiers, scribes, they all come here. And in that steam, everyone is briefly equal. You, naked as the day you were born, are suddenly part of the Roman rhythm. One more sweaty citizen in a long, glistening tradition. Not that the system is perfect. Some bathhouses were known for shady dealings, whispered gossip, and even pickpockets. And yes, hygiene wasn't always guaranteed. Some water sat too long. Some strigils were shared. But still, there's something beautiful in the ritual. The way steam makes everyone glow. The way strangers scrub each other's backs with familiarity, not shame. Eventually, you stand to leave, refreshed and glistening. Your skin tingles. Your mind floats. You're clean, inside and out. But as you dry off with a scratchy towel and reach for your sandals, you realize one crucial detail your tunic is missing. Yep, someone snatched it while you were soaking. Welcome to Rome. Don't worry, there's a vendor outside who'll sell you a new one for a decent price. But for now, as you step back into the bright sun wrapped in a loner sheet and dripping oil like a roast chicken, you can't help but smile. You've survived another day in the world's cleanest dirty city. And speaking of survival, it's time to shift focus. Rome didn't just bathe its body, it tried to purify its mind. Up next, you'll join a Roman household and discover the rituals of spiritual cleanliness. From household gods to unlucky omens, get ready for incense, whispers, and the occasional chicken liver on a plate. You shuffle home from the bath still glowing, your newly purchased tunic sticking slightly to damp skin. As the sun begins its slow descent behind terracotta roofs, the city breathes a little easier. Children chase each other through alleyways. A fruit vendor counts coins. Somewhere, a lyre plucks a half-forgotten melody. And you're about to learn that in ancient Rome, cleanliness extended far beyond your pores. It reached into your spirit. You step into a modest Roman domus, the kind that doesn't boast marble columns or imported silk wall hangings, but has charm, a little fountain in the atrium, a clay idol tucked in a corner niche, the faint scent of laurel and cooked onions lingering in the air. This is where Romans engaged in daily rituals of spiritual hygiene quiet, habitual actions meant to keep the chaos of the world at bay. Because it wasn't just about removing dirt from your skin, it was about keeping bad luck from clinging to your soul. The lararium is the heart of it all. Every Roman household, rich or poor, had one. It's not large, just a little shrine tucked into the wall near the entrance, usually decorated with images of the Lares and Penates, guardian spirits of the home and pantry. These weren't gods you prayed to for fame or conquest. These were the spiritual janitors of daily life, keepers of the hearth, guardians of leftover stew. You light a small oil lamp and offer a pinch of grain. The flame flickers. A little soot curls into the air. You whisper a few words, nothing fancy, just enough to say, "Thanks for not letting the kitchen catch fire today." This ritual wasn't optional. It was expected. To skip the daily offering was to invite misfortune or worse, mice in the pantry. Romans were a superstitious bunch, and they liked their gods fed and flattered. You don't mess with the spirits who control your breakfast. But it didn't end there. Roman spirituality was full of cleanliness rituals, some mild, some more elaborate. For example, after attending a funeral, you were considered ritually unclean. That meant before you could re-enter your home, you had to be sprinkled with water, sometimes mixed with salt or crushed herbs. Think of it like spiritual hand sanitizer, designed to wash off the ghostly residue of death. One quirky belief, that certain days were just unlucky, called dies nefasti. These were days when official business was forbidden, and personal hygiene often got a boost too. You didn't want to carry yesterday's bad energy into an already cursed Tuesday, after all. So you might burn some incense, wash your hands in cold water, and stay away from sharp objects and political discussions. Historians still argue whether these spiritual practices had genuine psychological benefits, or if they were just elaborate traditions passed down like grandma's chicken recipe. But either way, they gave Romans a sense of control in a world full of colds, curses, and catty neighbors. You wander deeper into the house and find the kitchen small, smoky, and surprisingly spiritual. A little statue of Vesta sits above the hearth, soot darkened but serene. Vesta was the goddess of the hearth flame, and keeping her happy meant your family stayed warm and well fed. Each meal began and ended with a murmured thanks to her. If the fire went out, bad omen. If it flared up while you were stirring beans, time to buy a lottery ticket or a sacrificial chicken. Speaking of chickens, spiritual cleanliness often came with feathers. Augurs. Roman priests who read omens regularly consulted the behavior of sacred chickens before battles, weddings, even dinner parties. If the chicken clucked too much, or not enough, or refused to eat, that event got rescheduled. This wasn't just politics. It was about keeping the invisible threads of luck and misfortune in their proper tangle. And then there were purification rites. Let's say someone had a nightmare. Not just a weird one, but one involving blood, snakes, or, worse, someone losing teeth. That was a red flag. The dreamer might wash their hands in flowing water, anoint their temples with oil, or even walk counterclockwise around a temple 3 times while humming a protective chant. A bit much, sure. But in a world without Ambien or therapy, you take your comfort where you can. You see it now how every aspect of Roman life was wrapped in this invisible gauze of spiritual hygiene. Even public buildings had rituals. The Senate opened sessions with prayers and sacrifices. Gladiator games were preceded by auguries. New shops burned incense in the doorway to clear out bad energy. Even public toilets had protective graffiti, invoking minor deities to ward off hemorrhoids and thieves. You laugh to yourself remembering the scratched Latin phrase you saw earlier in a latrine, cacator cave malum, roughly translated pooper, beware of evil. It sounds like a joke, but to a Roman, it wasn't. Evil spirits loved dark, damp places, and there's no place darker or damper than a communal toilet. Your host now invites you to share the evening meal, and you notice something peculiar. Before sitting, everyone touches the table briefly, then presses 2 fingers to their lips and then to the wall behind them. It's quick, almost invisible. A gesture of gratitude to the household spirits. You mimic it, just in case. No point tempting fate. One of the children knocks over a jug of wine and gasps. The mother calms him and wipes it up, but then flicks a few drops of the spilled wine onto the hearth. A spontaneous offering. Better to give than to waste. It's a small moment, but it speaks volumes. And here's the thing, these rituals weren't stiff or formal. They were woven into the fabric of life. Clean your floor. Sprinkle salt water. New baby smoke the cradle with laurel. Weird smell in the pantry. Burn sage and whisper to the lares. It was everyday magic. Half habit, half hope. Some Romans even kept purification bundles, little sachets filled with herbs like rosemary, rue, and bay, tied with twine and hung near doors or worn under clothing. They were the ancient equivalent of a good luck charm and air freshener in one. If you smelled like bay leaves, people assumed you were spiritually stable and maybe a decent cook. As the stars begin to blink above the city, you step into the courtyard and feel a light breeze. Rome has quieted. The street dogs settle. Lamps flicker in upper windows. Somewhere in the distance, a priest chants a blessing, his voice echoing against stone. You take a deep breath, the clean night air tinged with oil, incense, and possibility. Tomorrow may bring dust, politics, spilled stew, or spontaneous street theater, but tonight, you're purified. You've bathed your body and your spirit. You've survived food, filth, and folklore. You're Roman now, through and through. But don't get too comfortable, because next up, we're heading into the most bizarre chapter of Roman hygiene yet, how urine powered an entire industry. That's right. It's time to follow the scent to the Polonica, where dirty laundry meets ancient chemistry, and Romans turned pee into profit. So, you've soaked in communal baths, scraped yourself clean with a strigil, nodded politely to household gods, and offered your respects to a very judgmental kitchen chicken. You're feeling fresh, reborn, even. But don't get too smug. Rome isn't done challenging your ideas about cleanliness just yet. Now, take a deep breath, maybe not too deep, and follow your nose to the part of the city where sanitation and commerce collide. You're heading into the heart of the Polonica, the ancient Roman laundry shop. Yes, laundry. But this isn't your modern tumble-dry low, lavender-scented rinse cycle. This is where the most unlikely of ingredients reigns supreme: human urine. You arrive at a bustling Fullonica nestled between a shoemaker's stall and a fishmonger, whose stand you make a mental note never to return to. The shop's exterior is unimpressive, just another doorway in a long line of archways. But once inside, it's unmistakable. The smell, that pungent, acrid, eye-watering cocktail of ammonia, sweat, and slightly toasted linen. You've entered the inner sanctum of Roman cleanliness, and your sinuses will never forget it. Let's back up a bit. How did urine liquid waste, often flung from second-story windows, end up becoming the MVP of Roman laundry simple chemistry? Urine contains ammonia, which acts as a natural cleansing agent, breaking down grease and lifting stains from fabric. Think of it as Rome's industrial-strength detergent, cheap, effective, and always in supply. The fullones, or laundry workers, were an essential part of Roman urban life. Their job wasn't just to clean tunics, but to maintain the appearance of Rome's citizenry. You might wear the same toga for months, but when it finally turned from off-white to questionable beige, it was time to bring it here. You step further into the shop, careful not to trip on amphorae filled with yellow liquid labeled fresh. A worker greets you with a nod and a nose that has clearly given up. He's barefoot, his tunic rolled high, and he's currently stomping a batch of tunics in a stone basin. Yes, stomping like grapes. Only instead of making wine, he's agitating dirty linens in a frothy cocktail of water and ammonia-rich pee. This wasn't just guesswork. The Romans perfected the technique. Clothes were soaked in vats of diluted urine, stomped repeatedly to push the cleaning agent deep into the fibers, and then transferred to rinse tubs. Sometimes ash or lye was added for extra oomph. Finally, garments were laid out to dry, then brushed with clay powder to restore their crisp, chalky white sheen. Yes, you heard that right, chalky sheen. Roman whites weren't snow fresh. They were mildly dusty, and that's just how they liked them. Historians still argue whether Fullonica were considered hygienic spaces or tolerated necessities. The odor alone would have made anyone question whether cleanliness was really worth the cost. But no one could deny the results. A properly processed toga emerged from this stench palace, gleaming and stiff with pride, ready to be worn to a tribunal, a dinner party, or the Senate itself. You watch as another worker takes a garment from a drying rack and begins brushing it with a bundle of stiff bristles. The motion is rhythmic, almost meditative. You hear one of the workers hum an old lullaby as he brushes. It's oddly soothing until you remember that tunic was marinating in pee an hour ago. Now here's the strangest part. Urine was so valuable to the laundry industry that the Emperor Vespasian actually placed a tax on it. That's right, pee was a taxable commodity. Public urinals, known as fullones pots, were placed around the city, and anyone collecting urine for commercial use had to pay a fee. When Vespasian's son mocked this policy, the emperor famously held up a coin and asked, "Does it smell?" When his son said no, Vespasian replied, "And yet it came from urine." Thus was born the phrase, "Pecunia non olet," money doesn't stink. You can't help but laugh as you think about it. Somewhere in Rome, a banker is counting his coins, completely unaware that they trace their value back to the contents of a very full chamber pot. You glance around at the men and women working the tubs and think this is the Roman hustle. It's dirty, it's smelly, it's brilliant. Not everyone respected the fullones, though. Their work, while necessary, was looked down upon by some of the more perfumed elite. You hear a passing senator mutter about the stink of the plebs as he hurries by, holding a perfumed cloth to his nose. But joke's on him, his robe was probably laundered here last week. And then there's the Guild of Fullones. These workers weren't just smelly outcasts. They were organized. They formed associations, passed down trade secrets, and even hosted public games and banquets. They had gods of their own, especially Minerva, goddess of craftsmanship and wisdom. In fact, the festival of Minerva often included parades of launderers carrying their tools like ceremonial scepters. Yes, somewhere in Rome there was a parade float celebrating sponge sticks and soapstones. You find yourself unexpectedly admiring them. These men and women, ankle deep in frothy waste, performed a task no one praised but everyone relied on. Rome, for all its glory, still needed clean underwear. And these were the people who made that happen. Now, it wasn't just clothes. The Phallonica also handled household linens, religious garments, and even theatrical costumes. Rome's many plays, festivals, and temples required spotless textiles. And that meant more stomping, more brushing, more careful rinsing. The line between sacred and stinky was thinner than you'd expect. As you step back toward the doorway, your nose finally adjusting to the ever-present funk, you hear someone shout about a shipment of aged urine arriving from a nearby district. Yes, apparently older P richer in ammonia was more potent. Some Fullones even had preferences. Oh, I only use transtiberim for tunics, it has that tangy edge. You imagine one saying with a connoisseur's pride. Before you leave, a worker offers to rinse your sandals with a splash of water from a clean bucket. You accept, gratefully, pretending not to notice the splash came from the same jug labeled "not pee." Probably, you smile, thank him, and step outside into the sweet, glorious air of the Roman street. And that's the thing you walk away feeling oddly appreciative. Sure, you smell faintly like a used amphora, but you've witnessed something profound, an entire civilization turning bodily waste into economic necessity. Rome didn't flinch from filth, it mastered it. But your day isn't done yet, because the bathhouses and laundry weren't the only ways Romans maintained their image. Next, you'll head into the world of Roman cosmetics and perfumes, where crushed beetles and powdered lead promised beauty and sometimes delivered disaster. Get ready to paint your face, powder your nose, and question your life choices, all in the name of cleanliness and charm. Your sandals still squish slightly as you walk, damp from your recent encounter with the world's most questionable rinse. The aroma of the Phallonica still clings to your tunic, just faint enough to be mistaken for eccentric cologne. But don't worry, you're headed somewhere much more fragrant now. You follow the curl of lavender-scented air toward a domed building where the scent of roses, myrrh, and something vaguely metallic coils through the entrance. This is no bathhouse. This is the Roman cosmetic apothecary, a curious blend of perfumery, medicine, and theatrical illusion. And believe it or not, here is where the pursuit of cleanliness becomes something else entirely, the art of being presentable. You step inside and are immediately met with a kaleidoscope of color. Clay jars line the shelves, each labeled in tight script: Cerussa, Kohl, Alabastron, Unguenta. Oils in hues of emerald and gold glisten in glass flasks. Pestles rest inside bowls crusted with glittering dust cinnabar. Crushed pearl, maybe a touch of something that once crawled. A woman sits cross-legged near the back, carefully applying white paste to her face using a polished bronze mirror. Her cheeks are ghostly pale, her eyes ringed in thick black kohl, and her lips tinged with wine-red pigment. It's beautiful, in a haunting, slightly theatrical way. You sit beside her as she explains proudly that her base is made from lead. Yes, lead. The Romans called it Cerussa, and it was their go-to skin lightener. Mixed with vinegar and water, it created a smooth, chalky white foundation, prized by wealthy women and some men for its ability to mimic the unblemished faces of marble statues. Historians still argue whether they understood the dangers some suspect they knew, and simply accepted the trade-off between beauty and blood poisoning. Others believe the link wasn't clear until much later. You gently run a finger along the edge of a lead paste jar and feel how slick it is. Elegant. Deadly. Welcome to Roman beauty, where the rule was, if it stings a little, It must be working. Spee. But cosmetics weren't just for vanity. They were part of a daily cleanliness ritual. In the same way you might spritz deodorant and dab on moisturizer. Romans massaged scented oils into their skin, lined their eyes with soot or powdered minerals, and powdered their hair with finely ground herbs. Ointments helped mask body odor. Yes, but they also signaled social rank, mood, even political affiliations. You watch as a merchant prepares his personal scent, a blend of cardamom, frankincense, pine resin, and crushed iris root. He dabs it behind his ears with practiced flair. "For the Senate today," he says with a wink, as if political decisions are best made when everyone smells like an enchanted forest. And he's not wrong. Perfume was political. Roman emperors had signature scents. Cleopatra, though technically Egyptian, was famously said to drench herself in oil of rose and cinnamon before meeting Roman elites. Scents traveled as surely as armies, and a person's aroma could enter a room before they did. A good scent was power. A bad one, social suicide. But where did these magical oils and powders come from? You trail a young apprentice as she grinds dried flowers with a mortar, then mixes them into olive oil heated gently over a flame. The process is slow, deliberate. Some perfumes steeped for weeks. Others were pressed into solid cones and stored in clay jars until just the right moment. Myrrh and cinnamon were imported from far-flung lands, and saffron worth more than its weight in gold. One quirky tidbit: some Romans believed goat fat, when combined with rose oil, produced the most long-lasting scent. Goat fat. The same animal you'd see eating laundry off a line was now the base of elite perfumes. You picture a noblewoman at a banquet, her shimmering presence floating on a cloud of goat essence. It's oddly charming, and well, resourceful. You try on a few scents yourself, dabbing oil onto your wrists, rubbing a little powder into your neck. The smells layer and shift, first floral, then smoky, then strangely metallic. You sneeze once, twice. The shopkeeper laughs and offers a small cloth soaked in thyme water. "That one's for funerals," she says, motioning toward the jar that nearly knocked you out. Stick to rose and laurel for dinner parties. Makeup, too, wasn't just about aesthetics. Eye makeup, typically made from soot, antimony, or malachite, was believed to protect against eye infections, especially in the dusty Roman air. Thick lines weren't just fashionable, they were medicinal. Lip stains, often derived from red ochre or even crushed beetles, had similar dual purposes: beauty and health. Historians still debate whether Romans genuinely believed in the curative power of cosmetics, or if it was clever marketing by the vendors. Either way, a painted face was more than skin deep. And it wasn't just women. Roman men also used perfumes, facial creams, and occasionally light makeup, particularly actors, politicians, and members of the upper class. Being presentable meant being powerful. Cleanliness, in this sense, was social armor. You notice a few oddities in the corner tweezers, pumice stones, even razors carved from bronze. Hair removal was a huge part of Roman grooming, especially among the elite. Underarm hair, leg hair, even the faintest hint of a unibrow. Gone. Romans wanted smooth, glistening skin. There was even a servant class dedicated to this task. Think of them as ancient estheticians with less job security. You shudder slightly at the thought of a blunt bronze razor anywhere near your person and step back toward the main counter. The shopkeeper hands you a small alabaster jar. Inside is a creamy salve scented with rose, honey, and something minty. She nods at your clothes and says, "You smell like laundry day. This will help." You thank her, dabbing a bit behind your ears. Instantly, the scent of urine is replaced by something softer, warmer, cleaner, or at least more intentional. As you exit the apothecary, the sun's begun to dip low, gilding the edges of the city in molten gold. You pass citizens leaning against pillars, their faces powdered, their sandals polished. A young man flicks a comb through his hair, admiring his reflection in a bronze shield. A child rubs lavender oil into her wrists before hugging her grandmother. It's a city of faces, not just shown, but curated. Rome is a place where even cleanliness wears makeup. But of course, there's more. Because cleanliness didn't always involve baths and scents. Sometimes, it meant avoiding contamination at all costs. Sometimes, it meant believing your very breath could be poisoned by the wrong person's presence. Next, you'll explore the curious practices Romans used to stay clean in times of illness, from charm bracelets and garlic necklaces to social distancing that involved actual curses. Ready your amulet. It's about to get superstitious. You've powdered your face, dabbed goat fat perfume behind your ears, and managed not to sneeze your soul out in the apothecary. You're looking sharp by Roman standards and smelling far better than a Fullonica apprentice. But tonight, Roman hygiene takes a turn. We're leaving oil and rose water behind and stepping into a shadowier, more suspicious part of cleanliness. Because sometimes, being clean didn't mean washing, it meant protection. Especially during times of illness, when invisible threats crept through the city like rumors through the Senate. And Romans, they didn't exactly have germ theory, but they did have garlic necklaces, amulets, incantations, and a strong belief that bad air and worse people could make you very, very sick. So imagine you're walking through Rome during a particularly tense time, a hot summer, when fevers seem to ripple through neighborhoods like ripples in a bucket of questionable wine. People are nervous. Whispers of a bad wind circulate. You pass shuttered homes marked with red lines. A few families burn pine resin in their doorways. Somewhere nearby, a priest is chanting to the goddess Salus, protector of health. Welcome to the Roman version of pandemic protocol minus the masks, but heavy on the superstition. You enter a family courtyard and notice garlic braided around the lintel. Not for cooking, at least not tonight. Romans believed garlic had purifying properties. The smell was thought to repel evil spirits and sickness alike. Some even wore it around their necks, hoping it would form a kind of olfactory force field. You, ever the curious wanderer, sniff cautiously. It's strong enough to make your eyes water. Effective. Who knows? Intimidating. Absolutely. Nearby, a mother rubs her toddler's chest with a paste of honey and crushed herbs, part healing, part protection, and partly just what her grandmother used. He saw a lizard in his dream last night, she explains. I don't want it to follow him. You nod solemnly. You're learning quickly that Roman cleanliness was just as much about the unseen as the visible. Now, remember that crocodile dung sunscreen the Egyptians used? Well, Romans weren't above their own creative substances. One popular illness prevention trick was hanging sachets of sulfur or powdered frankincense around the neck. Some added powdered wolf liver. Yes, wolf liver. Historians still argue whether this was meant to heal, ward off spirits, or just make people stay 6 feet away due to the smell. And then there's the bulla, a small amulet worn by Roman children, especially boys, as a talisman against illness and misfortune. Made of leather, gold, or lead, depending on how rich your parents were. It often contained inscriptions, charms, or bits of protective herbs. You run your fingers over one hanging from a child's neck. It's warm from his skin, and he clutches it like it's the only thing keeping the world in place. For adults, there were phylacteries, tiny scrolls worn in leather pouches, inscribed with spells or the names of protective deities. These weren't decorative. They were serious business. Romans believed in the power of the written word, especially when etched carefully with intent. Illness was an intruder, and these were the locks on the metaphorical door. In extreme cases, entire neighborhoods might perform collective rituals. You hear bells in the distance and follow them to a nearby forum, where a group of citizens circles a fire. They toss in small offerings, wheat, dried fruit, A few drops of wine and murmur a chant to Febris, the goddess of fever. The air is thick with smoke and tension. One man stands silently off to the side, holding a chicken in his arms. You don't ask why. Back at home, even the architecture gets involved. Thresholds are sprinkled with salt. Walls are painted with images of protective eyes or snakes, a symbol that doubles as danger and guardian. Some wealthier homes have carved inscriptions near their entrances reading, "Hi-C Salus, health is here." You suspect it's less a boast and more a hopeful reminder. Let's not forget the concept of miasma, the idea that disease floated through the air like malevolent fog. Romans thought illness spread through bad air, especially during plagues. And while that idea was flawed, it wasn't entirely off the mark. They knew that foul smells and stagnant water often preceded outbreaks. So what did they do? They lit incense, burned juniper, opened windows, cleansed streets with vinegar, poured wine over thresholds. Some even avoided certain people entirely, not because of symptoms, but because of bad vibes. Historians still argue whether early quarantine practices were more psychological than medical, but the effort was there. Speaking of avoidance, if someone died in a home, particularly of something contagious, the house itself could be considered tainted. Owners might host purification rituals involving priests, chanting, and copious amounts of sulfur smoke. In a few extreme cases, houses were even abandoned. After all, you can clean a floor, but how do you scrub out a ghost? And yet, despite all the garlic, smoke, chanting, and sweaty amulets, illness still came. Plagues swept through Rome more than once. The Antonine Plague, the Plague of Cyprian. Each time, Romans fought back not just with medicine, but with ritual, with belief, with a deep desire to cleanse, to cast out the evil wherever it hid on the skin, in the air, or tucked beneath the stairs. You sit now in a quiet garden, watching a woman wash her hands in a shallow basin of rosewater. It's not just for hygiene. It's an offering, a moment of stillness meant to realign the body and the soul. The water glimmers in the fading light. Her fingers move slowly, gently, like the world will collapse if she rushes. And maybe it would. As the stars appear, a small boy tiptoes outside holding a clay dish with a flickering flame. He sets it on the edge of the fountain and whispers something, maybe a prayer, maybe a spell, maybe just thanks. You realize then that for the Romans, cleanliness wasn't a state. It was a practice, a rhythm, a daily defense against the chaos of life. Some fought with vinegar and soap, others with words and smoke. But everyone fought. Everyone tried to keep their space internal and external a little safer, a little cleaner. But as night fully falls and you turn toward home, there's one part of Roman cleanliness you haven't seen yet. One so strange, so personal, that even many Romans didn't speak of it openly. Next, you'll step inside the elite villa's private bathroom, a marvel of engineering, privacy, and occasional disaster. Prepare yourself for marble seats, heated floors, and the faint terror of communal sponges returning for a second round. You make your way through the lamplit streets, the air heavy with the mingled scents of night jasmine, roasted chestnuts, and, just faintly, smoke from sulfur rituals lingering in alley corners. Rome by night is no less busy than Rome by day. It simply whispers instead of shouts. And your feet carry you now toward one of the most peculiar, rarely discussed, but absolutely essential aspects of Roman hygiene. You're about to enter a wealthy Roman villa, not to gaze at its mosaics or admire its atrium fountain, but to explore its private bathroom. Yes, even in ancient times, those with means found ways to make certain daily processes feel less like a chore and more like a spa visit. Sort of. Your sandals click softly against marble as you're led down a side corridor. This isn't a public latrine like the multi-seater stone benches you've passed elsewhere in the city. No graffiti, no shared sponge stick tutorium, no overheard gossip about Caesar's new mistress. This is luxury. You step into a small room tiled in black and white geometric patterns. A gentle warmth radiates from the floor thanks to the hypercaust system beneath it, an ingenious Roman invention that circulates hot air under the tiles. The walls are painted in soft colors, and a low marble seat is built into an alcove, topped with a carved lid. It looks inviting, in a way that only Roman marble can. And here's the quirky truth. This isn't just a functional space. It's designed to feel civilized, elegant, possibly even divine. Above the seat, a niche holds a tiny statue of Cloacina, the goddess of the sewer. Yes, Romans had a deity for everything, even waste management. Cloacina began as a minor Etruscan figure, but was fully embraced by the Romans, earning a shrine right over the main city sewer, the Cloaca Maxima. So, if you've ever whispered a thank you to your toilet in the middle of the night after bad seafood, you and the Romans are spiritually aligned. A servant enters with a small jug of warmed water and a folded cloth. You raise a brow, but he simply nods. Private toilets in elite homes often came with their own attendants, people responsible for keeping the space clean, stocked with linen or wool for wiping, and ready with perfumed oil to cleanse the hands afterward. The sponge on a stick may have been common in public latrines, but here, in the homes of the elite, cleanliness became a personal service. Of course, as with many Roman luxuries, there's a hidden danger. The connection to the city's sewers, though brilliant for waste disposal, had a nasty habit of backfiring. Literally, with no modern S-trap or airtight seals, gases from the sewer system could occasionally surge back up the pipe, sometimes carrying fire along with them. There are stories, perhaps exaggerated, but deliciously dramatic, of flames bursting from the toilet during summer heat waves. Imagine hosting a dinner party and having to explain why your guest's toga is suddenly on fire. To prevent these toilet firebombs, many villas installed bronze or clay valves, and some even positioned small statues near the seat, not just for aesthetic appeal, but as supposed guardians. Tiny figures of Hercules, Mercury, or even Cupid might watch over your most vulnerable moments, offering spiritual protection in case of plumbing rebellion. Historians still argue whether these toilet chambers were truly common among the elite or more of a rarity, preserved in only a few homes. But there's no doubt that the idea of comfort during necessary business appealed to the Roman sensibility. You've bathed in heated pools, scented your body with imported oils. Why not extend the experience to your quietest moments? You glance around the chamber and spot a clay vessel tucked discreetly into a niche. Inside, lavender sprigs and a thin sheet of waxed linen, Roman air freshener. Some even burned rosemary or myrrh in small braziers nearby, not just for scent, but to cleanse the air from bad humors and, let's be honest, bad smells. The line between ritual and room spray was very thin. Back in the main corridor, a servant mentions with a smirk that the house across the street recently had to renovate after their toilet exploded during a dinner party. You chuckle, shaking your head, and decide not to ask further. Some things are better left to imagination. And then there's the etiquette. Even in private settings, Roman bathroom manners were strict. No humming, no talking, and definitely no eating, yes. That rule had to be made explicit at one point. Draw your own conclusions. A person of refinement treated the bathroom as a space of quiet reflection, not conversation. But here's the real twist. Despite having access to private latrines, many elite Romans still preferred to visit the public baths and latrines for social reasons. Going to the public toilet wasn't just about relief. It was about connection. Deals were struck. Secrets exchanged. Politics whispered. Think of it as the ancient version of grabbing a coffee together, just with stone benches and echoing acoustics. Still, For nighttime or urgent use, the private toilet was indispensable.
114 vượt quá 1.000 ký tự.
Output 161.
100 mota vượt quá 1.000 ký tự.
At output 161.
100 tara vượt quá 1.000 ký tự.
Output 161.
117 vượt quá 1.000 ký tự.
Output 161. At Python P1, equal. Many homes also kept chamber pots urinals in bedrooms. Some were so finely crafted they were passed down as family heirlooms. Imagine inheriting your great-grandfather's chamber pot. Use it well. Someone probably said with solemn pride. Len P1, split. At output 34, Python P2, you return to the villa's central atrium, now glowing gently with oil lamps. There's music in. The distance may be a lyre or flute and the faint murmur of evening conversations. Your host offers you a small clay cup of wine and a smile. Len P2, split. Output 41. Python P3 eats. You've seen our finest chamber, he jokes. Now you're truly part of the household, and you know what he's right. Cleanliness in ancient Rome wasn't just about physical hygiene. It was about social belonging, about comfort, about civilization itself. Len P3, split. Output 39. Python P4 is tonight. You've touched every layer, oils, scents, protective charms, even warmed marble seats. And you're only halfway through your journey. Because next, we'll return to the city streets and explore the great public latrines, Rome's open secrets, where business was done, alliances forged, and everyone knew who skipped wiping. Len P4, split E. At output 47, many homes also kept chamber pots urinals in bedrooms. Some were so finely crafted they were passed down as family heirlooms. Imagine inheriting your great-grandfather's chamber pot. Use it well, someone probably said with solemn pride. You return to the villa's central atrium, now glowing gently with oil lamps. There's music in the distance, maybe a lyre or flute, and the faint murmur of evening conversations. Your host offers you a small clay cup of wine and a smile. You've seen our finest chamber, he jokes. Now you're truly part of the household. And you know what he's right. Cleanliness in ancient Rome wasn't just about physical hygiene. It was about social belonging, about comfort, about civilization itself. Tonight, you've touched every layer oils, scents, protective charms, even warmed marble seats. And you're only halfway through your journey. Because next, we'll return to the city streets and explore the great public latrines, Rome's open secrets, where business was done, alliances forged, and everyone knew who skipped wiping. Brace yourself. The benches are wide, the conversations are louder, and the sponge is always shared. You step back onto the cobbled streets of Rome, feeling freshly acquainted with the upper-class experience of private marble-seated relief. But now, it's time to see where the real action happens. You follow a stream of chatter, sandals slapping against wet stones, and soon find yourself outside a broad, squat building with a tiled roof and a faintly suspicious smell wafting from its arched entryway. Welcome to the public latrine. This isn't the kind of place you sneak into and out of with your head down. No, public latrines in Rome were as much a part of community life as the baths or the forum. In fact, they were often attached to those very spaces. And inside, the experience is equal parts efficient, communal, and by today's standards, absolutely baffling. You enter, and immediately the temperature drops. The air is thick, but not unbearable, helped by a central opening in the ceiling and a trickling water channel running across the floor. Along 3 of the walls are rows of smooth, flat stone seats, each one with an oval cutout and a second, smaller hole in the front. These are multi-user, no divider, full visibility thrones. You sit down, and there's someone to your left discussing grain prices, someone to your right humming a folk tune, and a slight draft from the sewer tunnel beneath you. Cozy. And the best part, no doors, no partitions, no privacy. The Romans, you see, had a different relationship with modesty, especially in shared spaces. Using the latrine was a public, normalized act. You might bump into your senator, your baker, or your biggest rival in mid-conversation and mid-everything else. You shift uncomfortably, glancing down at the small front hole. That one's for the communal sponge, yes, that sponge. Affixed to a stick, soaked in vinegar or salt water between uses, and stored in a shared trough. It's called a tersorium, and if your hygiene instincts just twitched, you're not alone. Historians still argue whether users had individual sponges they carried, or if it was truly one for all. Judging by the smell, you're guessing it was the latter. At least there's plumbing. A continuous stream of water runs beneath the seats, washing waste away to the main sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima. The flow isn't strong, but it's enough to keep things moving. Sort of. You peer down one of the channels and catch a glimpse of something bobbing along. You decide not to investigate further. The layout of the latrine isn't just practical, it's social. Romans used these spaces for conversation, debate, and casual banter. Think of it as a coffee shop, but instead of sipping espresso, everyone's squatting with purpose. Gossip was exchanged, politics debated, and more than a few under-the-table deals brokered between seatmates. There are even surviving inscriptions and graffiti etched into the walls. Messages ranging from romantic confessions to angry complaints about sponge theft. Marcus owes me a sponge. One scrawl reads, "Classic Marcus." You hear someone nearby reciting a poem about love, loss, and flatulence. His audience chuckles politely. Another man enters, nods at everyone, and immediately launches into a complaint about rising fish prices. Nobody bats an eye. Of course, the smells were present, even with constant water flow and open-air design. Latrines were known for their pungent aroma. To combat this, users often carried small sachets of herbs or pressed perfumed wax under their noses. Some would burn incense before entering, and others simply held their breath and prayed to Cloacina. But it wasn't all camaraderie and casual bowel movements. Public toilets had risks, some minor, like slipping on a wet tile, and others more ominous. Rats and snakes occasionally made appearances through the sewer channels. There are accounts, possibly exaggerated, but deliciously terrifying, of toilet-related accidents involving venomous bites and even drownings. Suddenly, that chatty neighbor to your left seems a bit less interesting. You stand and approach a stone basin at the corner of the room. It's filled with gently running water for rinsing hands and cleaning the tersorium. A servant dips a sponge in vinegar and places it back in its slot with a flourish that suggests this is his third round today. He offers you a small cloth. "For your hands," he says, cheerfully. You thank him. You are, after all, a guest. Now here's the fun bit. Despite their openness, latrines were often beautifully decorated. You spot faded frescoes on the walls depicting mythological scenes, pastoral landscapes, even a few cheeky caricatures of emperors doing their business. One particularly bold image shows Neptune using a trident to stir a suspiciously shaped vat. It's oddly charming. In fact, latrines were sometimes viewed as sacred spaces. Offerings were occasionally placed at entrances: flowers, coins, even bits of food. And protective spells were etched above the doorways to ward off evil spirits and possibly constipation. Romans didn't separate the sacred from the sanitary. They understood that all aspects of life, yes, even this deserved ritual and respect. As you exit the latrine, a group of children runs by laughing, one of them holding a fresh sponge on a stick like a baton. You decide not to ask where he got it. Back on the street, the air smells sweeter. You feel oddly refreshed, not because of the aroma, but because you've just seen how thoroughly the Romans integrated hygiene into the fabric of public life. They didn't just hide it behind walls, they shared it, celebrated it, even joked about it. Cleanliness wasn't just an act. It was a community effort. But you're not quite done. Because while the public latrine might seem like the final stop on Rome's hygiene tour, there's still one more piece of the puzzle to uncover. Next, you'll visit the dirty side of clean the waste collectors, sewer workers, and the mysterious men who kept the system flowing from beneath the streets. These unsung heroes of hygiene battled clogs, floods, and very unfortunate smells also Rome could shine on the surface. Time to grab a torch and head underground. You've emerged from the lively, scent-swirled chaos of Rome's public latrine, blinking into daylight and breathing through your mouth. But don't get too comfortable up here, because now you're headed in the opposite direction, down, beneath the marble grandeur, beneath the gossiping baths and sponge-wielding citizens, into the bowels of the city itself. Today, you walk in the footsteps of Rome's dirtiest profession, the people who kept the sewers flowing, the drains clear, and the fountains sparkling with fresh, aqueduct-fed water. These were the custodians of Roman cleanliness. Though, let's be honest, they didn't exactly smell the part. You start by ducking through a narrow archway behind a bathhouse. There's no sign, no mosaic, no friendly statue of a river god welcoming you in. Just a sloping passage of moss-slick stone stairs and a distinctly earthy smell. One step at a time, you descend into dimness, lantern in hand, until the noise of the city fades into a steady drip, drip, drip. Welcome to the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's main sewer artery. Latin for Great Drain. This massive tunnel predates even the Republic. Originally built by the Etruscans and later expanded by Roman engineers into a vast underground network. You can stand upright inside it, walk through it, float a small barge in it, if you're feeling brave. You splash your way into a vaulted chamber, the air damp and close, walls glistening with a sheen that smells faintly of vinegar, mold, and history. Above you, daylight peeks through iron grates. You see the shadow of a sandal cross one. Some poor soul above has no idea they're strolling over what the Romans might consider a marvel of sanitation, or a nightmare, possibly both. Now here's the catch. The Cloaca Maxima wasn't just for human waste. It was Rome's all-purpose garbage chute. Rainwater, bath runoff, dye-house sludge, street sweepings, kitchen refuse, blood from butcher stalls if it could flow. It came here, and when it didn't flow, that's where the cloacinae came in. Who were these unlucky souls? Rome's sewer workers, maintenance men, and waste porters, dressed in simple tunics, usually barefoot or in worn sandals. They climbed into the underbelly of the city armed with shovels, buckets, and torches. Some were slaves, others hired laborers. All were essential, and all were routinely elbow-deep in things you wouldn't dare describe before bedtime. You meet one of them now, an older man with a bent back, cracked nails, and a cheery whistle echoing off the walls. He carries a curved iron rake and a bucket filled with silt, leaves, and something unidentifiable that probably once had a tail. Backed up near the forum again, he grunts, wiping sweat from his brow with a cloth he probably shouldn't be using. Third time this month. You offer a sympathetic nod, and he grins. Better down here than up there, he says. At least it's quiet. There's truth in that. The work was filthy, yes, but necessary and oddly respected. Some accounts suggest the sewer workers had their own small shrines, their own rituals for protection. After all, they dealt with what the city discarded. They kept the streets dry and the baths from turning into swamps. And the system they maintained, honestly, it's a feat of engineering. Channels of varying widths angled just right for gravity to do the work. Covered drains snaking beneath roadways. Overflow tunnels leading to the Tiber. It's not flashy, but it works. That said, the system wasn't flawless. During floods or heavy rain, backups were common. Waste could erupt from street grates or fountain spouts, an unholy surprise for the unsuspecting toga-clad passerby. There are tales of unfortunate folks slipping and being swept several yards before clawing their way to safety. You try not to imagine the cleanup afterward, but when things flowed well, it was a quiet triumph. A reminder that Rome, beneath its temples and politics, was built on a foundation of clever problem-solving and a willingness to get dirty. You wander deeper, past side tunnels that reek of stagnant water, past bones and shards of broken amphorae, until you reach a narrowing bend where a few cloacinae rest, eating lunch. The water in the channel sloshes faster now, a murky current rushing over the stones. You've been following this path for hours, and the air is thick with the scent of damp stone and whatever odd things may have been tossed in here long ago. The plumbers, or whatever you want to call them, would have worked in conditions far worse than this. Yet here you are, keeping pace with their eerie shadow. The idea of treasure hunting in the sewers isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. There's something about lost things that draws people in, even in places like this. The collapsed vault near the Subura district must have held more than just silver rings and broken pots. But it feels like there's still something to discover down here, as if you're just one turn away from something worth more than gold. The crunching noise someone's still gnawing on something makes you look around, and sure enough, it's the same person who'd mentioned the sandal. They've always had a tendency to chew loudly when they're nervous or in deep thought. Could it be the stress of the task? Or is it the thought of whatever treasure they might find? Do you think the vault could lead us to something bigger? Someone asks. More than a few coins or a moldy ring. You wonder, too. Would you be disappointed if all you found was a bunch of broken statues or rotting armor? Or would it be the story of what was once there that would matter most? That's such a vivid scene you've set up. The experience of stepping out of the bathhouse, dripping and disoriented, really brings to life that strange blend of luxury and grime that Rome's public baths embodied. They were, in many ways, the beating heart of the city, not just a place to cleanse the body, but to commune, gossip, debate, and even negotiate. I can see the layers of experience, the nobles who came for their fragrant soaps, the working folk who shared water and soap like a communal resource, the rats who probably had their own little routines. It's like a social microcosm, all in one place. How do you feel about the idea of cleanliness in ancient Rome? Was it more than just physical cleanliness, like a reflection of status and order in society, a place of sweat, oil, and endlessly awkward eye contact, where social class, gossip, and bodily maintenance came together in one steamy, echoing chamber? Bring your strigil. You're going to need it. By now, your nose has adjusted to the ever-changing bouquet of ancient Rome, fluctuating somewhere between fermented fish sauce, rose oil, sewer mist, and disappointment. And after your time underground among the sewer workers, you're more than ready for something cleaner, or at least more fragrant. So, you head toward the humming heart of Roman daily life. Not the Senate, not the Forum, but the public bathhouse, known as Thermae or Balnea. These steamy sanctuaries were where Romans came to cleanse, to socialize, to gossip, to debate, and occasionally to dramatically faint from dehydration. The bath complex looms ahead like a temple. Grand columns, archways, mosaic floors. Honestly, it's more beautiful than many noble homes. And that's the point. These were the great equalizers. Rich or poor, senator or sausage seller, everyone came here. You'd likely see a general and a goat herder scrubbing down 2 benches apart. Although the general probably had a gold-plated strigil and didn't have to carry his own olive oil bottle, You hand your sandals to an attendant and enter the apoditerium, the changing room. It's a beehive of activity. Men disrobing, folding togas, tucking valuables into niches in the wall. A few slaves linger with watchful eyes. Theft was common. And if someone swipes your favorite sponge while you're in the caldarium, good luck getting it back. Speaking of the caldarium, the hot room, it's your next stop, but you don't dive in yet. The Roman bath process is ritualistic. You warm up, you sweat, you oil, you scrape, you soak, you freeze, you chat, then you oil again for good measure. You start in the tepidarium, the warm room, letting your skin adjust to the humidity. The air is thick, aromatic. There's heated water bubbling in a shallow basin, walls decorated with sea nymphs and dolphins. You sit on a smooth bench beside an older man who seems to be asleep upright, or meditating. Hard to tell. Here's your first laugh of the day. Romans didn't use soap, not in the way we think of it. Soap was seen as something for barbarians. Instead, they slathered themselves with scented oil oleum, usually olive-based, sometimes infused with herbs. Once you're good and shiny, an attendant uses a strigil, a curved metal tool, to scrape it all off along with sweat and dirt. It's a bit like a squeegee for your skin, and it feels strangely satisfying, assuming you're not too ticklish. You step into the caldarium, the hot room. It hits you like a wet curtain. Steam curls from the floors. Your lungs tighten slightly. Your pores open whether they're ready or not. This room is heated from below by the hypocaust system fires stoked in chambers beneath the floor, keep the tiles warm and the air heavy. You find a seat by the wall. There's a conversation nearby about the best wine from Hispania, another about chariot betting odds. You tune it all out and focus on not melting. A few drops of sweat roll down your back and you resist the urge to bolt. But you stay. You're a Roman now. After about 10 minutes, your body screaming for cool air, you make your escape to the frigidarium, the cold plunge. And it is absolutely frigid. You dip a toe. You regret it. Then you plunge. It's like being punched by an icy fist made of judgement and eucalyptus. But, oh, does it feel good afterward? And now, you rest. You recline on a bench in the sunlit garden area, wrapped in a towel, munching on dates handed to you by a passing servant. You're relaxed, cleaner than you've been in days, and your skin glows like a well-basted roast pig. A musician plays softly on a lyre. Two women argue gently in the corner over a borrowed hairpin. A teenage boy tries to impress his friends with a handstand and knocks over a basin. Everyone claps. The mood is light. Here's the thing about Roman baths: they were about more than bathing. They were society. News traveled here. Alliances formed. Enemies side-eyed each other across pools. Physicians gave checkups. Philosophers held impromptu lectures. Sometimes, politicians delivered speeches while sweating profusely from every pore. Historians still argue whether Roman baths were truly egalitarian or subtly tiered after all. Some had private rooms, VIP entrances, or hours set aside for women versus men. But most agree, if you didn't visit the baths, you weren't living Roman life. And this is where the unspoken rules came in. Rule 1, no cannonballs. Obvious, but worth mentioning. Rule 2, don't hog the strigil. Some guys take forever. Rule 3, don't splash the senator, unless you have a good lawyer. Rule 4, conversation is welcome. Debate is common, but keep it civil. You're half naked and slippery. This is not the place to settle debts. Rule 5, clean your own feet before entering the plunge. No one wants your street dust floating next to them like croutons in a salad. You lie back now, arms behind your head, basking in the afterglow of olive oil and mild heat exhaustion. There's something magical about this place. The way strangers become neighbors. The way steam erases status. The way even politics feels a little less miserable when everyone's in sandals and a towel. And just when you think the experience is done, someone offers you a final rinse. a gentle pour of rose water over your shoulders. You don't know if this is normal or an act of flirtation, but you accept it like royalty. When you finally rise and step outside, the air feels sharper, your senses clearer. You are reborn, Roman style. Your skin sings, your limbs float. You've survived the baths, and dare you say it, you kind of miss them already. But don't wander off too far yet. Next, you're about to witness one of the strangest and most overlooked aspects of Roman hygiene, how children were trained to go properly, what role superstition played in potty training, and why ancient lullabies occasionally included references to the gods of the latrine. Time to meet the tiniest, sassiest members of the empire, armed with chamber pots, curses, and miniature sponges. You leave the bathhouse lighter, cleaner, and slightly olive-scented, your feet making soft slap-slap noises on the sun-warmed pavement. A passing breeze ruffles your tunic, and for the first time in what feels like days, your skin doesn't feel like it's wearing a layer of old stew. But your next stop isn't quite as glamorous, because now you're headed into the homes of Roman families not for feasting, or debate, or polite company, but to witness how children learned to stay clean, Roman style. And as you'll see, training a toddler to use a chamber pot in 78 AD was no less messy, dramatic, or unintentionally hilarious than it is today. You duck into a modest domus, a middle-class home with a mosaic floor, modest courtyard, and the unmistakable sound of a toddler wailing in the distance. You follow it, carefully. In a small room off the main atrium, a young boy barefoot, grumpy, and clearly fed up is planted on a squat terracotta pot. His mother crouches nearby with a sprig of rosemary in one hand and a honey cake in the other. You've arrived at that sacred moment, the ancient Roman potty training ritual. The pot he's perched on isn't fancy, just a smooth clay vessel, maybe painted with a dolphin or a little laurel wreath. But in Rome, even a child's chamber pot had rules. You're expected to perform at the right times, in the right place, and, if possible, with an offering to the household spirits, especially those who governed health, fate, and, oddly enough, thresholds. That's right, thresholds, because in Roman belief, the Lars and Penates, the household gods, watched over all domestic behavior, including cleanliness. A child's first successful business might be met with a small offering, a crumb of cake, a smear of oil, a whispered thanks. It wasn't just bodily, it was spiritual. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or sincerely superstitious, but some believe the Romans thought improper potty training could displease household spirits, bringing illness or bad luck. And honestly, if you've ever cleaned up a child's accident under a dinner table, that sounds entirely plausible. Back to our boy. He's squirming. His mother sings softly to him a lullaby that references Stercutus, the rustic god associated with manure and soil. Yes, that was a real Roman deity, technically tied to agriculture, but any Roman mother knew the value of invoking him in moments of digestive suspense. You hum along. The tune is simple, calming, and not unlike what you might hear in any nursery today, just with a bit more mythology and a pinch of earthy realism. Hush now, little Gaius, she coos. Do your duty, and Stercutus will smile. You stifle a chuckle. Nearby, another child and older sibling washes her hands in a shallow basin. She's already graduated from pot to chamber to street-side discretion. And yes, that's a thing. In ancient Rome, there wasn't much in the way of modern taboos around childhood toileting. Young kids were expected to go wherever was deemed practical and safe, a pot in the home, a drain in the courtyard, or even a quiet corner in the forum if you were fast and shameless. Potty shame. Not so much. But hygiene, that mattered. You watch as the mother wipes her son with a cloth soaked in diluted vinegar, then dabs his hands with a rosewater-soaked sponge. Cleanliness was instilled early, and while sponges weren't reserved for adults alone, children had smaller, often personalized ones. Picture it, little Roman toddlers toddling around with their own mini Tessoria, learning to wipe front to back with historical precision. And if that's not adorable, I don't know what is. Let's shift now to the quirks. Some Roman parents placed tiny bells on chamber pots not for music, but to alert the household that the child had successfully delivered the goods. Think of it as the world's oldest bathroom notification system. Ding goes the bell, in comes the honey cake. The positive reinforcement was real. Others used tiny carved tokens, miniature ivory hands, or little terracotta phalluses to hang over the potty area, meant to ward off evil spirits, or jealous gazes that might curse a child's digestion. It sounds absurd until you realize many modern cultures still have rituals to protect children from misfortune during vulnerable milestones. And it wasn't just about the act. Romans were big on transition moments. A child's final graduation from chamber pot to outdoor street drain might be marked with a mini ceremony burning a cloth used in early days, offering it to the household flame, or simply having the father pat the child's head and declare him ready for the road. Charming, yes. Sanitary, debatable. Speaking of sanitary, we need to talk about accidents. Even in well-disciplined homes, kids had slip-ups. Roman parents, like parents everywhere, often handled it with a mix of mild exasperation, vinegar scrubs, and the phrase, "Oh Jupiter, not again," or the Latin equivalent. Servants, if present, typically handled cleanup, but in poorer homes, older siblings did. This meant that by the age of 7, many Roman kids were experts in domestic sanitation. They could oil a baby's bottom, rinse a sponge, and chant a prayer to the Lares without blinking. Historians still argue whether this early involvement made Roman children more mature or just permanently traumatized. And then there were the games. Yes, you heard right. Bathroom-themed games. Some Roman dolls had removable tunics and tiny pots. Children acted out domestic scenes, mimicking mothers and nurses. One surviving fragment of a child's toy includes a little sponge stick. Whether that was a joke or just unfortunate timing, we may never know. You exit the home, the sound of giggling and splashy cleanup fading behind you, and find yourself smiling. The more you see, the more human the Romans become. They argued, cleaned, trained, and sighed, just like modern families. They sang nonsense lullabies. They bribed toddlers with cakes. They had gods for everything, even poop. But just when you think you've reached peak domesticity, Rome throws one more curveball. Next, you'll visit the grimy side of religious hygiene, the strange rituals of temple baths, purification ceremonies involving ash, milk, and chicken blood, and why some priest had to shave every inch of their body, yes, every inch before stepping into sacred spaces. So don't put away your vinegar just yet. The gods are watching. You follow the rhythm of distant chanting through the winding alleys, past market stalls closing for the evening, and wine-scented taverns flickering with lamplight. The scent shifts again from olive oil and sweat to something sharper, almost medicinal. And soon, it's clear you're approaching one of Rome's many temples. But you're not here to make an offering or admire the architecture. You're here to explore one of the least talked about parts of Roman religion, ritual purification. Because for all their glorious excesses, the Romans were serious about sacred cleanliness. And the rules. Let's just say they went well beyond washing your hands. You step through a stone gate into a courtyard cloaked in lavender smoke. Incense curls upward from bronze censers. Acolytes in white tunics move like phantoms across marble floors, whispering prayers to gods with more titles than most emperors. Everything feels quiet, too quiet, like even your sandals might be judged. This temple is dedicated to Vesta, goddess of the hearth and purity, whose sacred fire never goes out. And trust me, if you're going to study religious hygiene, you might as well start with the Vestal Virgins, Rome's most fastidiously clean, mystifyingly powerful priestesses. The Vestals were chosen young, sworn to 30 years of celibacy, and charged with maintaining both Rome's eternal flame and its moral hygiene. And to do so, they had to follow an elaborate, borderline exhausting set of cleaning rituals. Take their daily ablutions. They began each morning with a full-body rinse, using water fetched from a sacred spring, carried in specially consecrated vessels. No ordinary plumbing for these ladies, only divine-approved sources. After rinsing, they were rubbed down with a mixture of powdered marble and goat's milk, supposedly exfoliating, possibly just sticky. Then came the ash ceremony. Vestals would sometimes dust themselves with fine ash collected from sacrificial altars, yes. Literal God-burnt remains as a sign of humility and spiritual cleanliness. It sounds dramatic, and it was, especially when combined with the fact that they couldn't so much as sneeze in public without someone calling it an omen. And here's where it gets intense. On feast days, or after certain rites, Vestals had to undergo a full-body hair removal ritual. Every strand, gone, head to toe. Ancient texts hint at a mixture of pumice stone, fermented barley paste, and incantations. You imagine the horror of being scrubbed raw while someone whispers blessings about fire and virtue. Modern spa day. This was not. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or enforced for hygiene. But either way, the result was the same: smooth, solemn, sacred. You move on from the Vestals and step into the bathing chamber used by male temple servants, less famous, but equally ritualistic. There's no splashy caldarium or perfumed attendants here. This is purification, not pampering. One priest stands waist deep in a pool, tinged faintly green with laurel and mint. He murmurs prayers between mouthfuls of blessed water, spitting each sip back into the pool. Yes, it's weird. But for Romans, inner and outer purity had to align. So drinking and spitting sacred water became a way to cleanse the tongue before chants. Nearby, another priest ladles goat milk over his shoulders while a younger one rubs his feet with a paste made from crushed fig leaves. A bit of spa, a bit of witchcraft, and a whole lot of humility. Because to approach the gods, you had to be spotless body, soul, and sometimes armpit. And don't forget the scapegoat rituals. In certain purification ceremonies, a priest would gently rub a live chicken or goat against the skin of the unclean individual, transferring the pollution into the animal. The animal was then released or sacrificed, depending on the rite. You watch one such ritual now, eyes widening as a very confused goat is rubbed against a soldier who'd just returned from battle. The goat does not look impressed. But cleanliness wasn't just for the officiants. Even worshippers had rules. Before entering the inner sanctum of most temples, people had to stop at a purgatorium, a small room or platform, where they washed their hands, face, and sometimes feet. Offerings of soapwort, a natural plant-based cleanser, vinegar, and salt were common. Smudging herbs like juniper were waved around the body to smoke out bad influences. You're starting to think the gods had more spa services than the public baths. And then there were purity inspections. If someone wanted to serve in a ritual or make a major offering, a priest might inspect them, checking for visible wounds, rashes, or even bad breath. It sounds judgmental, and it was. But Romans saw disease and dirt as signs of spiritual imbalance. You didn't want to offend Mars because you forgot to rinse your sandals. Even funerals had hygiene rules. Mourners were considered ritually unclean for 9 days and were required to bathe, burn their clothes, and sometimes sleep outside the city before they were readmitted to polite society. This wasn't just fear of germs, it was fear of spiritual contamination, and possibly the smell. Back in the main courtyard, you watch a purification parade, a line of musicians, priests, children with olive branches, and a man carrying a basin of chicken blood. Not to bathe in, don't worry. It'll be sprinkled over a new altar to sanctify it. Because, apparently, nothing says clean like symbolic poultry sacrifice. You step aside as the parade passes. A child drops a laurel branch and gives you a solemn look. as though you've just inherited its entire fate. You pick it up and nod gravely. Laurel received. You whisper. She seems satisfied. By the time you leave the temple grounds, your mind is spinning with sacred soaps and poultry-soaked symbolism. You've seen a side of Roman hygiene most tourists miss: the strange, beautiful, slightly gross belief that purity is power. And next, you'll explore how this obsession with ritual cleanliness shaped Roman attitudes toward death and the surprisingly hygienic business of funerals, embalming, and graveyard maintenance. You've seen how they wash for the gods. Now let's see how they cleaned up for the afterlife. You step out of the temple grounds, still faintly tingling from the incense and spiritual static clinging to your tunic. Laurel leaves crunch underfoot, and the low afternoon sun casts long, solemn shadows across the cobbles. A breeze passes, not quite refreshing, not quite foul, and you know instinctively you're getting close to Rome's final act, death. But unlike modern customs that bury death in hushed tones and sanitizing metaphors, the Romans were surprisingly hands-on when it came to the end of life. They didn't just mourn their dead, they cleaned them, carried them, processed them, sang over them, perfumed them, and, in some neighborhoods, stored their ashes in surprisingly fashionable wall cubbies. And so, you find yourself walking the Via Appia, Rome's great road of the dead, flanked by mausoleums, marble busts, and epitaphs both touching and slightly passive-aggressive. She was a loyal wife, one says, more or less. You whisper a respectful chuckle. Your first stop, a modest domus where a woman has just passed. Inside, a small crowd gathers around the body, which has been laid out on a simple couch. She wears her best stola, arms crossed, coins on her eyes for Charon, the ferryman of the underworld, though scholars still argue whether this was common or more theatrical flourish. And now, the cleaning begins. Two women, most likely her daughters, or professional mourners, dip cloths into warm water steeped with myrrh and rosemary, gently wiping her face, her hands, her feet. This isn't just to freshen her up, it's symbolic, a way to remove the impurities of the living world before she enters the realm of the dead. The water is poured into a shallow basin and disposed of carefully. Romans believed death was contagious, not medically, but spiritually. Anyone who touched the body had to undergo purification before rejoining society. Even the basin is sprinkled with salt and ash afterward, to make sure no underworld residue lingers. Next comes scenting. A powdered mixture of crushed petals, pine resin, and cinnamon is brushed along her hairline. Not only does this slow the effects of decay, it's considered a signal to the gods. A divine cologne, if you will. You watch as they gently place a sprig of lavender in each sleeve. And then comes the mouth ritual. A child, maybe a granddaughter, leans in with a spoon carved from olive wood and opens the woman's lips. She places a few drops of wine onto the tongue, just a taste, so the soul can toast the journey across the Styx. Even if she didn't drink in life, she'll sip in death. You've heard worse customs. Meanwhile, in the atrium, the men prepare the funeral procession. Trumpeters, torchbearers, and hired mourners with wailing voices like opera divas are lining up. You peek outside and see one particularly theatrical mourner practicing her cry, a crescendo that starts with "ah" and ends somewhere around "wah." She'll be great. But we're not done with the hygiene part just yet, because after the funeral, the entire household is considered ritually unclean. So once the body is carried off, the purification process begins again. Every surface that the deceased touched is wiped with salt water. A clay pot is shattered at the threshold, breaking bad luck and signaling to the gods that this home is not permanently tied to death. It's a spiritual Ctrl+Alt+Delete. The mourners then undergo a lavatio, a special kind of mourning bath that includes not only water, but also symbolic ingredients: fennel for clarity, olive oil for healing, and sometimes even ground up silver coins. Though that last part was more show-off than standard. You join the procession now as it winds through the city, flanked by curious onlookers, street vendors pausing in respect, and children pretending to sob with exaggerated sincerity. The funeral heads for one of Rome's great necropolis, or cities of the dead, where tombs line the outskirts like a quiet suburb eternal, expensive and oddly well kept. And here's where the sanitation part shines. Roman graveyards weren't just dusty lots full of forgotten bones. They were landscaped, pruned, and sometimes perfumed. Families visited regularly, bringing food, drinks, and new tokens. Small drainage channels were built around mausoleums to carry off rainwater and runoff. Tombs were scrubbed of bird droppings and soot. The dead were expected to rest cleanly, or at least attractively. Even the crematoriums were surprisingly tidy, considering the business. You pass one now, an open-air structure where a body has just been reduced to ash. A worker in a soot-streaked tunic uses a bronze rake to sweep the remains into a small urn. Once cooled, the bones will be washed again, yes, washed in rose water and wine before being sealed away. You peek inside a columbarium, a shared tomb with rows of little cubbyholes for urns. It's like a high-rise apartment building, but quieter. Some niches are decorated with painted portraits, some with tiny statues, others with favorite items, a sewing needle, a dice set, a toy chariot. You find yourself quietly wondering what you'd want in your urn slot. A sponge stick, a bath token, maybe a half-eaten honey cake. Now, for the living mourning hygiene was its own beast. Romans believed the grieving body was vulnerable, spiritually porous, so mourners were instructed to avoid certain foods, no raw onions, wear unwashed clothes to signal their unclean state, and even refrain from bathing for 9 days. After that, a special bath, usually cold, marked their return to the world. Some families even shaved their heads or wore ashes on their faces. One particularly dramatic widow in front of you tosses herself theatrically onto the tomb floor, sobbing into her hands, then discreetly pats her face with a perfumed cloth, mourning, but make it fashion. And finally, the post-funeral feast. You're invited to join, of course. You recline at a low table beside the family, surrounded by fig tarts, roast lamb, dates stuffed with pine nuts, and goblets of spiced wine. Python orig, ew. The food isn't just for the guests, it's for the dead. A portion of each dish is set aside, often placed at the tomb or burned in a small brazier nearby. Because in Rome, even the deceased deserved dessert. As you sip your wine and listen to someone retell an old joke the departed once loved, it occurs to you that hygiene in death wasn't about hiding mortality. It was about preparing for a transition, honoring the vessel that once housed the soul, and ensuring that grief didn't poison the living. Everything is cleaned. Everyone is changed. You rise, feeling full not just from the food, but from the quiet awe of how thoroughly the Romans tied hygiene to every chapter of life. And next, you'll follow the trail of the foulest job in ancient Rome, the fullers, the professional launderers who cleaned clothing with urine, stomped togas barefoot in vats, and somehow didn't faint from the ammonia. Len Orig, split.
Schön.
An output 155. A Python orig, E. The food isn't just for the guests, it's for the dead. A portion of each dish is set aside, often placed at the tomb or burned in a small brazier nearby. Because in Rome, even the deceased deserved dessert. As you sip your wine and listen to someone retell an old joke the departed once loved, it occurs to you that hygiene in death wasn't about hiding mortality. It was about preparing for a transition, honoring the vessel that once housed the soul, and ensuring that grief didn't poison the living. Everything is cleaned. Everyone is changed. You rise, feeling full, not just from the food, but from the quiet awe of how thoroughly the Romans tied hygiene to every chapter of life. And next, you'll follow the trail of the foulest job in ancient Rome, the fullers, the professional launderers who cleaned clothing with urine, stomped togas barefoot in vats, and somehow didn't faint from the ammonia. Orig words, ixels, orig. Split, len orig words. Output 155. Python orig equals the food isn't just for the guests, it's for the dead. A portion of each dish is set aside, often placed at the tomb or burned in a small brazier nearby. Because in Rome, even the deceased deserve dessert. As you sip your wine and listen to someone retell an old joke the departed once loved, it occurs to you that hygiene in death wasn't about hiding mortality. It was about preparing for a transition, honoring the vessel that once housed the soul, and ensuring that grief didn't poison the living. Everything is cleaned. Everyone is changed. You rise, feeling full, not just from the food, but from the quiet awe of how thoroughly the Romans tied hygiene to every chapter of life. And next, you'll follow the trail of the foulest job in ancient Rome, the fullers, the professional launderers who cleaned clothing with urine, stomped togas barefoot in vats, and somehow didn't faint from the ammonia. Len orig. Split. Output 1.5. Python orig. Zales. The food isn't just for the guests, it's for the dead. A portion of each dish is set aside, often placed at the tomb or burned in a small brazier nearby. Because in Rome, even the deceased deserved dessert. As you sip your wine and listen to someone retell an old joke the departed once loved, it occurs to you that hygiene in death wasn't about hiding mortality. It was about preparing for a transition, honoring the vessel that once housed the soul, and ensuring that grief didn't poison the living. Everything is cleaned. Everyone is changed. You rise, feeling full, not just from the food, but from the quiet awe of how thoroughly the Romans tied hygiene to every chapter of life. And next, you'll follow the trail of the foulest job in ancient Rome, the fullers, the professional launderers who cleaned clothing with urine, stomped togas barefoot in vats, and somehow didn't faint from the ammonia. Len orig. Split.
As.
Is output 25. Python orig. The food isn't just for the guests, it's for the dead. A portion of each dish is set aside, often placed at the tomb or burned in a small brazier nearby. Because in Rome, even the deceased deserve dessert. As you sip your wine and listen to someone retell an old joke the departed once loved, it occurs to you that hygiene in death wasn't about hiding mortality. It was about preparing for a transition, honoring the vessel that once housed the soul, and ensuring that grief didn't poison the living. Everything is cleaned. Everyone is changed. You rise, feeling full not just from the food, but from the quiet awe of how thoroughly the Romans tied hygiene to every chapter of life. And next, you'll follow the trail of the foulest job in ancient Rome, the fullers, the professional launderers who cleaned clothing with urine, stomped togas barefoot in vats, and somehow didn't faint from the ammonia. Len orig. Split. Output 155.
1.6 vượt quá 1.000 ký tự.
Output 155 true. The food isn't just for the guests, it's for the dead. A portion of each dish is set aside, often placed at the tomb or burned in a small brazier nearby. Because in Rome, even the deceased deserve dessert. As you sip your wine and listen to someone retell an old joke the departed once loved, it occurs to you that hygiene in death wasn't about hiding mortality. It was about preparing for a transition, honoring the vessel that once housed the soul, and ensuring that grief didn't poison the living. Everything is cleaned. Everyone is changed. You rise, feeling full not just from the food, but from the quiet awe of how thoroughly the Romans tied hygiene to every chapter of life. And next, you'll follow the trail of the foulest job in ancient Rome, The fullers, the professional launderers who cleaned clothing with urine, stomped togas barefoot in vats, and somehow didn't faint from the ammonia. It's about to get aromatic. You leave the tombs with your feet a little dusty, your mind filled with ashes, lavender, and coin-eyed ancestors. But now, it's time to meet the unsung, unscented heroes of Roman hygiene, the fullers. And if you thought public latrines and sacred sponge sticks were the end of it, oh, sweet summer toga, you're not even close. You follow your nose first. It's a scent that bites sharp, acrid, and undeniably human. It leads you to a squat stone building on the edge of the Subura district. Smoke drifting from a vent and a rhythm slosh. Stomp, slosh, stomp, pulsing from within. You've arrived at a fullonica, the Roman version of a laundromat. If laundromats smelled like vinegar, old leather, and mild suffering. The doorway is half curtained by damp linen. You duck through and immediately have to suppress a cough, because the primary cleaning agent here, urine. Yes, actual human urine. Romans discovered that ammonia in urine made an excellent degreaser, and so public urinals, or full-owns jars, were placed at street corners for citizens to contribute. The contents were then collected and brought here, where the fullers' professional launderers used it to scrub tunics, cloaks, and togas until they were freshish. You watch as a burly man in a stained tunic climbs into a shallow stone vat filled with garments and yellowish liquid. He begins to stomp, not delicately, not with ballet-like grace, this is full-on grape-stomping energy, but with socks and dignity. Well, former dignity. The rhythm of his feet, the slap of fabric, and the occasional squelch form a sort of grotesque symphony. You try not to breathe too deeply. Once the fabric is stomped sufficiently, it's rinsed in a clean vat, sometimes with water scented with thyme or mint, and then hung on wooden racks outside. Clothes flap in the breeze like surrender flags from the war against body odor. Historians still argue whether this was a respected trade or a job for the desperate, but we know that fullers were essential. They even had their own guilds and patron gods. The Emperor Vespasian famously taxed the urine collectors, causing outrage among some citizens, to which he allegedly held up a coin and asked, "Does it smell practical, if pungent?" You move deeper into the workshop. A woman stands beside a steaming pot, stirring a mixture of clay, chalk, and soapwort. She daubs the paste onto a toga, scrubs it with a stiff bristled brush, and mutters about wine stains and ungrateful senators. Another worker rubs clothes with pumice to lift oil spots, while a younger apprentice arranges folded tunics on a heated slab to press them. It's equal parts laundry, chemistry, and theatrical suffering. The final step, scenting. A bit of rosewater here, a pinch of cinnamon there, maybe a cedarwood infusion if the client's important. You spot one toga being delicately embroidered with laurel leaves in gold thread, clearly destined for someone who insists on sweating in style. And speaking of style, Romans were fussy about clothing. A crisp, white toga wasn't just for looking fresh. It signified respectability, citizenship, even morality. A stained toga, on the other hand, could imply scandal, laziness, or that you had spent too much time in the amphitheater yelling at gladiators. So fullers didn't just wash, they polished reputations. As you step outside, past the fluttering laundry and fading ammonia haze, you can't help but feel a little admiration. These workers toiled in one of the city's smelliest corners, handling garments from senators and street sellers alike, restoring dignity one stomp at a time. And now, your journey is drawing to a close. You've wandered through bathhouses and latrines, sniffed the sacred and the putrid, watched toddlers chant to Stercutus and vestals rubbed down with goat's milk. You've held a sponge stick, avoided a rain of chamber pot contents, and watched a very confused goat carry away someone's sins. Ancient Rome didn't invent cleanliness, but it built an empire on maintaining appearances, masking odors, and washing away both grime and guilt, whether by steam, sponge, or sacrifice. The Romans knew that to live was to scrub, and that cleanliness wasn't just next to godliness. It was often directly across the forum from it. So take one last stroll through the streets. Watch a boy dunk a pot in a fountain. Hear a bathhouse door creak open. Smell bread baking beside a sewer vent. Feel the city's strange heartbeat, 1 part marble, 1 part mud, always moving, always balancing the beautiful and the messy. And as the sun sets behind the 7 hills, let the last whispers of Rome's cleansing rituals fade gently from your thoughts. Now, your feet are tired, your mind full, and the echoes of sandals on cobblestones still murmur softly in your ears. You've wandered through a world both strangely foreign and disarmingly familiar, a place where gods watched from bathhouse ceilings, where sponges stood in for toilet paper, and where even death was given a good rinse and a rosewater wipe down. Let that imagery soften now. Picture the public baths at twilight, steam curling like ghostly dancers across the marble, the rhythmic splash of water in quiet pools. Somewhere, an old man scrapes oil from his shoulders and hums a tune he's forgotten the words to. Beyond the courtyard, a child giggles at his own reflection in a basin. A woman shakes out a linen sheet, the dust catching golden light. A cat slinks past a sewer grate, unbothered by the weight of history. The city exhales. And so do you. Let your breath deepen. Your limbs grow heavier. There's no need for strigils here. No vinegar baths. No sacred ash. Just the gentle hush of time folding in on itself, leaving you warm, relaxed, and safe in a world built not of marble, but of stories. Close your eyes. Let Rome slip away and drift into the quiet of your own dreams.